Hey, I'm Alex, and welcome to Hallucination. If you love true horror stories, consider subscribing. It really helps the channel grow. The stories you'll hear are shared by our audience from Reddit, and to keep their original essence, I read them exactly as they were written. Before we begin, let me know in the comments, where in the world are you listening from? Also, check the timestamps in the comments for story titles and easy navigation. Now, let's dive into the darkness. Story 1. I'm an Uber driver in Los Angeles. Something horrifying is unfolding in the city as we speak. I'm lucky to even be alive right now. I'm just about to be discharged from the hospital. Broken arm, broken clavicle, 19 stitches in my scalp, and all kinds of fun little cuts where they dug glass shards out of me. Also, my Civic is totaled. I've been driving for Uber in the LA area for almost 6 months now. Believe me when I say I've got plenty of stories already, but this one takes the cake and then some. My cousin is a screenwriter and he couldn't come up with some shit like this, and not just because all he writes are low-budget Christmas movies about business girls who go back to their hometowns to fall in love with a guy in a peacoat. Honestly, I'm still trying to figure out what even happened to me. 2 nights ago, I was cruising around in the Culver City area after dropping off a passenger. It was about 1:45 a.m. and I was ready to quit and go home, but another ride popped up over in Palms, which was close. There was no destination entered, which maybe should have been a red flag, but I took it anyway. I started heading over there and almost got T-boned by a string of cop cars that blasted through a red light going 90 to somewhere. Couple streets over, I crossed paths with an ambulance. I didn't think anything of it at the time, but when I got to my destination, some empty side street in Palms, and rolled down my window, it hit me just how many sirens I could hear. Way more than usual. And choppers too. There's always a few of those fuckers buzzing around, but this seemed extra. I figured there must be some kind of high-speed pursuit, or manhunt, or shooting, or something. I sat there parked at the curb for a while waiting for this dude to come down from his apartment. The app said his name was Eric, and Eric was taking his sweet time. He lived in one of those old complexes, former military housing that was probably slapped together in the 40s, and was now owned by some LA slumlord who charged his tenants $2,500 per month for a little 1-bedroom unit. While I was sitting there getting impatient, I saw a few people sprinting across the street about a block ahead of me, lit up orange in the glow of the streetlights. Not going for a jog either. I mean, they were running as fast they could go, like someone was chasing them. And I could hear someone hollering, but I couldn't tell what they were saying. They ran out of sight, and then the street went quiet again, except for that distant wail of sirens, and it was about that time when I started feeling really uneasy. Something in the air felt off, and suddenly the hair on my arms was standing up on end. My attention was fully fixed on that eerie, empty street ahead, so Eric scared the holy shit out of me when he yanked open my back door and said, "Are you Wes?" I told him I was, and he piled into the back seat and slammed the door shut. Immediately I could tell something was wrong. He was huffing and puffing like he'd just been running, covered in sweat, but most importantly, he had a blood-soaked t-shirt balled up against his neck. "Take me to the nearest hospital," he said. Then he reached over and hit the lock button on the door, which was a weird thing to do. I was like, "Dude, you don't look so good," and he goes, "No kidding, that's why I need to get to a hospital." I really didn't want to deal with this, so I said, "Hey man, maybe we better call you an ambulance." "No, I can't afford an ambulance. Just go, okay? Hurry up. I'm bleeding here." The thing was, I don't think he had even looked at me once during this exchange, because he was too busy looking back at the dark windows of that looming apartment complex. My heart was starting to beat a little faster, but I went ahead and found the nearest hospital on my Maps app. It was about 7 minutes away, maybe less if we hopped on the 10 freeway for a short stretch, which I intended to do. "Come on, let's go," he said, and I could hear fear in his voice. I hit the gas and took off. I watched him in the mirror as he craned his head all the way around to look out the back window at the big dark brick of his apartment complex falling away behind us. Only when it was fully out of sight did he turn forward. I took a few turns, heading for the nearest freeway on-ramp, and for a while we both stayed silent. I could hear him wheezing in the back seat. Every breath seemed labored. I caught glimpses of his face in the passing lights. His skin looked pale, and sweat was beaded up on his forehead. He looked scared and sick. I suddenly wished I'd had another face mask. I usually wore them while driving so passengers didn't give me COVID all the time, especially since I was still struggling after my last infection, but the strap had broken on my mask earlier that day. We hit a stoplight. Nobody else was at the intersection, and we sat there waiting for nothing. I considered running it, but then a police chopper banked low overhead, and I thought better of it. "So, what happened?" I asked. I caught his glance in the mirror. He looked like he had just remembered I was in the car with him. He spoke with a pained, sluggish intonation, barely moving his jaw to form the words. "Someone attacked me." "Oh shit, who?" "My neighbor. I woke up because I thought I heard something in my apartment. Got up and found the dude standing in my living room, completely naked." "What? Are you serious?" The light turned green and I took off again. Eric didn't elaborate for a moment, but then I think he felt my eyes on him in the mirror. He was bleeding too. Honestly, I knew this guy was a bubble off when I moved into the place, but it wasn't a big deal because he kept to himself. But not tonight. No, tonight he decided to break into my place and flap his weird little peener around in the middle of my living room. "What did you do?" I didn't know what to do. He was talking crazy, jabbering at me. Before I could really do anything, he jumped on me and he bit me. "He bit you?" "Yeah, pretty bad too." Then he ran off. "Jesus Christ." "Yeah." He shook his head like he couldn't believe it himself. The action seemed to hurt his wounded neck, and he grimaced. I dreaded how much blood he was probably getting on my seats. I almost missed my next turn on account of watching him in the mirror. He leaned back in his seat and groaned softly. He really looked bad. I started to get worried that this guy might end up dying in my back seat, so I put on a little more speed. A fire truck strobed through an intersection up ahead and disappeared from view as I brought the car to a brief halt at a stop sign. Something above me caught my eye and I leaned forward to look. There was an object perched on the long gooseneck of the nearest streetlight. It was one of those older streetlights, probably from the 90s, with a sodium vapor bulb that cast an orange disc on the street below. Whatever was on top of it was large, and at first it struck me as a nonsensical mass of cloth balanced impossibly up there, but a split second later it struck me as the shape of a crouching man. "What the hell?" I said out loud, and I could hear Eric shift in his seat behind me to look out the window. I was already rationalizing that a man crouched on top of a streetlight like a vulture was a completely idiotic notion, and that I must be mistaken, when the thing moved, and I could clearly make out the shape of a stooped head and arms, and most alarmingly eyes. 2 pinpricks of reflected light, like the retinas of a wild animal. I felt the bottom drop out of my stomach. Go now, go, don't." I jumped at the sound of Eric's panicked voice behind me, and without thinking I hit the gas. We shot off down the street, and although I tried to pick out the figure on the streetlight in my mirror, it was immediately obscured by a tangle of jacaranda branches. "What was that?" I asked. Hearing the fearful strain in my own voice made my heart pump even faster. But Eric didn't respond. Instead, he was writhing around on my back seat, moaning softly. I took another turn and spotted a sign for the freeway on-ramp ahead. Eric's movements were becoming spastic. I felt him thump against the backrest of my seat. More pained moaning. Christ, this dude's totally gonna give up the ghost in the back of my car. "Hey man, just hang on. We're almost there. Keep pressure on it. And, just keep pressure on it. And, just keep pressure on it." A tortured cry and a scuffling sound from the back seat, then abrupt silence. I glanced in my mirror again to see Eric's shape in silhouette. He was sitting bolt upright now, still as a statue. I was taken aback by the abrupt change in behavior. I could hear him take a deep inhale through his nose, like someone meditating. Then he spoke. "O negative." His voice was totally calm now, calm and low. It sent a chill up my spine. I hit the on-ramp, and we started the short climb to the elevated freeway, putting on speed. I instantly regretted it because I couldn't pull over as easily on the freeway if I needed to. "Sorry what?" I said. "You're O negative. Universal donor." "What?" He was right. I was O negative. But how in the James Randi fuck could he possibly know that? I've lost a lot of blood. I could use some O negative right about now," he said, and his voice was all thick and croaking like he was some pervert trying to talk me out of my clothes. "Dude, you're freaking me out," I said, and then this piece of shit giggled. He actually giggled, like some little schoolgirl who was up to no good. I was starting to panic, and merging onto the freeway was a clumsy blur. Thankfully, there was very little traffic at that hour. I kept looking in the mirror, but I couldn't make out his face, just the shape of his head framed against the rear window. I could see him pull the bloody t-shirt away from his neck, and then he made a strange hissing noise like air through a hose. "I've got a hole in my neck," he said in a raspy, matter-of-fact tone. "I can breathe right through it." I realized I was drifting out of my lane at about 60 miles per hour, and I numbly corrected course. Before I could think of anything to say, Eric seemed to snap into a completely different mood, or maybe a completely different personality. He doubled over and started whimpering. "Oh God, what's happening to me? What's happening?" "Hey, just try to stay calm. Hang on, we're like 2 minutes away," I said. "Oh God, it hurts. It burns." He kept whimpering and moaning, twisting and writhing in shadow behind me, his knees thumping the back of my seat like that awful little kid who has sat behind me on every flight I've ever taken. Suddenly he sat up straight again with a strange animal huff. Dead silence. I tried to glance over my shoulder, but I had to keep my eyes on the road to navigate a curve in the freeway as it ramped up into an arching overpass. "Yeah, you good?" I asked lamely. No response, just the sound of, well, I guess air wheezing through that hole in his throat. I put on speed, quickly passing a couple of slower moving cars. "The exit, it's coming right up," I said, as much to myself as to Eric. Then he spoke again, and not in a way that I liked. "I'm gonna kill you, but you're not gonna die." His voice was grating and filled with a malice that made my skin crawl and my throat tighten. "Hey man, just take it easy. There's no problem here," I stammered. "I'm gonna drink the life right out of you, O negative." My heart hammered in my chest. I willed myself to sit up straighter in my seat, to crimp my face into my best Clint Eastwood scowl. "Look, buddy, I don't want to have to do it, but I was taught Brazilian jiu-jitsu by an actual Brazilian, and I can bend you into a pretzel if it comes to it. So let's just stay cool here. And you know what? This ride is officially over. I'm gonna pull over now, and you can..." I looked up at the mirror again, and my heart stopped. The back seat was empty. I grabbed the mirror and tilted it to make sure I wasn't missing anything, but he was just gone. Was this motherfucker lying on my floor now? And that's when I felt his breath on my cheek, cold like a draft from an open freezer door and reeking of some distant rot that I couldn't place. I froze, my hands stone clubs on the steering wheel as he wheezed softly into my ear for one long agonizing moment. I started to turn my head, inching my eyes over to look, not minding that my Civic was drifting across lanes. Eric's face was right next to mine, but this was not the same man I had picked up. This was some twisted, nightmarish version of him. This dude's flesh was pale as death. His lips had turned black and they were peeled back in a grin or a grimace. I don't know which, exposing teeth that looked like they'd somehow all been filed down to these gnarled little points. I didn't get a good assessment of the guy's dental situation when he first got into the car, but I can tell you that he didn't look like this. Like a fucking shark. But the worst part was his eyes. They were murky blood-red pools with no pupil and no iris, and they seemed swollen and bulging in a way that reminded me of that Popeye thing that my fish had not long before it died. Just below his chin, his neck folded strangely with bloodied flesh that was chewed and pockmarked by someone else's teeth. Neither of us moved for another split second. He sucked air in equally through his nose and his throat hole like he was smelling me. Then all hell broke loose. He lunged forward, grabbing at me, clawing at me, snarling and rasping. It felt like getting attacked by a big dog. I don't know shit about Brazilian jiu-jitsu, but I fought for my life, letting go of the steering wheel so I could wail on this guy with both hands as he tried to bite my throat with those cannibal teeth. An instant later, we had slammed into the concrete barrier on the edge of the freeway, pitched up and sideways, and then we were sailing airborne off the side of the overpass. That fall felt like 100 years. I saw the moon go by the windows. Fat and yellow, the car rolled in the air, all my shit went airborne, and I found myself momentarily amazed by how much stuff I actually had in there. It all seemed to happen in slow motion, and I felt like I had time to consider many different aspects of my predicament as we fell. Eric wasn't buckled in, so he hit the roof, then the door, then the other door, then the roof again. Then asphalt that was bathed in that smoky streetlight orange was rushing up to meet us. And that was it. The next thing I remember was waking up in the hospital. The instant I regained consciousness, I thrashed around like I had just landed in boiling water, knocked over an IV stand and kicked a nurse so hard in the can that she yelped and ran across the room. "You're lucky to be alive." That's what they told me, and I couldn't agree more. But what really fucked me up was when the doctors told me that I had been alone in the car when the cops showed up. The paramedics had pulled me out of the wreck, but the way the doctors told it, there hadn't been hide nor hair of a passenger on the scene. Almost immediately I felt like they didn't believe me. I asked if they'd found the bloody t-shirt Eric had been holding against his neck, but nobody in the hospital knew anything about that. Later on, a characteristically dismissive cop showed up, mostly to judge me for wrecking my car. He didn't have any additional information, and he stated flatly that they had found me in a wreck that should have killed me, and that if someone had actually been in the car with me, they had miraculously survived as well, and apparently fled the scene. Whatever the case, I guess Eric hadn't taken the time to bite the throat out of my unconscious body while I was dangling upside down from my seatbelt. My mother was notified that I was in the hospital, and she jumped on a plane from Texas to come see me. She's supposed to be landing in about an hour. My cousin is my only family member who lives in the area, but he's apparently in Canada right now on the set of Business Girl Goes Back to Her Hometown for Christmas and falls in love with a guy in a Peacoat 6. No matter. All things considered, my injuries are pretty manageable. Of course, there are other issues to contend with now, namely figuring out what the hell just happened, what the hell is currently happening. It's not just this Eric guy who went all demon mode on me in the car, it's everything. All the sirens, the police, the ambulances, the fire trucks, the choppers, the people fleeing across the street, the fucking dude perched on the light pole like a 6-foot owl. As I sit here in my hospital room, there's an electric current of quietly unfolding disaster in the city around me. The hospital staff is bustling, and although nobody wants to give me the time of day about it, I can tell they're being inundated with a rash of new patients. Cops are marching up and down the hallways. I can hear screaming from a room nearby. Not 20 minutes ago, a squadron of military choppers just roared by the window on their way to do God knows what, and sure, you could probably explain that all away, but it really comes down to a feeling in my gut. I've used my phone to search online, and I found some people on social media talking about some weird stuff that's just happened to them. Some of it bears more than a passing resemblance to what I've described here. Talk of ghouls, talk of vampires, talk of some kind of nightmarish supernatural epidemic. Perhaps even more disturbing are the hordes of people who have shown up to tell these folks that they're full of shit, and officially, there's nothing. No articles, no news reports, no government announcements, nada, zilch. It's like the authorities have committed to telling us nothing, and the general public has committed to pretending that everything is fine and normal trademark. But I'll bet my life that something is happening here, something big, something hellish, and it's going to come boiling out into the open very soon. It's already in the air. I've never felt more sure of anything. If you're in Los Angeles, tell me with a straight face that you're not feeling this too. Story 2. When you lose a child, you'll give anything to get them back. That's what they were counting on. I found myself unable to get out of bed for hours most days. I would check the time on my phone and see her on my lock screen, smiling, with the sun hitting her little brown curls. In bed, I would go through my photos, looking at the pictures and videos of her, memorizing every word, taking every little piece of her I could find and trying to hold it close. It had only been 2 weeks. Jeff had been dealing with it his own way, going to a church group every night the last few days. I hadn't been able to talk about it, especially to strangers. Tonight, I was going with him. He had begged me to try it, said they were kind people. Even if I wanted to leave after 1 minute, they would all understand. The sun was setting over a well-trimmed lawn. The church itself looked old, a small building with a white steeple and brick walls glowing in the warm light. I didn't recognize the denomination on the sign, which only read Church of the New Dawn. The well-worn brass door handle clicked under Jeff's thumb, opening into a small meeting hall. Larger doors into the main church were closed, and about a dozen people chatted happily around a couple trays of cookies. An older man with gray hair and sunspots pushed up his glasses as he walked toward us, offering a hand to Jeff. "Earl, good to see you." They warmly shook hands. "You must be Susan. I'm Earl. So glad you could make it. I hear you're a teacher down at Hamilton Elementary." "Yes, for about 6 years now. My granddaughter goes there. She's in 2nd grade, Kayla Oatman." It met her, a nice girl, and told him as much. When a man wearing a black collar with the typical white square in the center approached, I knew he must be Reverend Silas. "Susan, so nice to meet you. I'm Reverend Silas Greenbaum." "A pleasure to meet you, Reverend." He was friendly and polite, with a projecting voice, which could be heard clearly even though he wasn't speaking loudly. Small streaks of gray peppered his temples, but his hair was otherwise thick and dark. I guessed him to be about 40. Over the next few minutes, everyone introduced themselves to me, with the exception of a lanky teenage boy sitting on a chair in the corner. He wore large sunglasses and hadn't moved from his seat since we arrived. "Charles, come over and say hi, please." Charles was the Reverend's son, it seemed. He slowly walked over, patent leather shoes stopping on the tiles, as the Reverend put an arm around him. First, he talked to Jeff. "I'm glad you're here," he said. The Reverend nodded at me and he turned reluctantly. "Hi, I'm Charles." His voice was flat, disinterested. I wondered if that was due to having to go to church every night as a teenage boy or something else. "His eyes are light sensitive. The sunglasses help him," the Reverend added. Charles walked straight back to the corner and took a seat. Soon enough, everyone picked up a chair and made a circle in the middle of the room. Earl talked about church business, such as bringing food and company to the members of the church unable to leave their houses. I respected a church where people put effort into caring for the members of their community. The Reverend stood. Jeff had told me he normally did a small sermon on weeknights. I wanted to speak about providence, the will of God. This would be my first glimpse at what this church actually was about, and I was curious. Jeff was in a vulnerable place, and often people were more susceptible to extreme views after something like that. If everything we say is lucky is in fact the work of God. Just last week I was in the grocery store and my son Charles here saw a man holding an onion, just staring at it, for a full minute. Jeff laughed, as did a few of the other members. They must have heard this story before. Charles told me, "That man right there, go to him," and I could see he had lost someone. When you lose someone you love more than anything in the world. His voice cracked, and he paused to gather himself. It makes you want to give up, but you can't. For them you have to keep going. Believe me, children of God, that the ones you love are not lost to God, and they are not gone, as long as you will sacrifice yourself, the way Jesus sacrificed himself for us, so that we may live eternal. You have to sacrifice your pain, let go of how you suffer, and think of others. In a time of loss it can be the hardest thing to do. But Jeff here has already done it. Just yesterday, Jeff brought dinner to Jean McCall. She can leave the house, and her husband is in the hospital with a staph infection, as you know. He paused, clearly affected, putting a hand over his mouth. Everyone was silent, listening. She called me and said she'd never had eggplant parmesan before, that it had made her day. Before he showed up, she only got out of bed at 4 in the afternoon because she was so down. She only put clothes on because Jeff was coming. She hadn't eaten all day. But then he showed up with a smile. The eggplant parmesan was one of the best things she'd ever tasted. She was very clear that I had to thank the chef personally, and I'm smart enough to listen to my elders. So thank you, Jeff. You made an old woman's day. A smile crossed Jeff's face. "Thank you, Reverend. And Jean already thanked me about 100 times. She's a sweet lady. But one more one hurt, I guess." The Reverend laughed, and others naturally joined in. "It never does. Let's pray." On the drive home, I held Jeff's hand. "You didn't tell me you were taking food for that old lady. I thought you were just bringing it to work for lunch." He smiled at me, squeezing my hand, then returning his eyes to the road. "I see why you like it there. They seem like good people. Also, you do make a mean eggplant parm." That Saturday, the Reverend was coming over for dinner. Jeff was cooking, as usual. I'd cleaned the place up, and was finishing dusting when I got to her picture. Rag in one hand, I picked up the cheap wooden frame with the other. I missed her smile so much. In this picture, she only had 4 teeth. Jeff had her in his arms, and I was hugging them both. After a friendly conversation at dinner, we all went to the living room. Reverend Silas walked straight up to that picture, leaning over to get a good look. "She's beautiful. What a blessing to have her, and what suffering to lose her. May God give you strength and grace to face each new day. It is the worst thing in the world to lose your child." He sat on the couch, leaning forward with his elbows on his knees. His eyes were piercing as he looked at me. "I lost my wife last year. It was a suicide." The Reverend's face was heavy. It was the first I'd heard of it, and I felt for him. "I lost her, but I still have my son. I still have Charles." He put a hand on my shoulder. "Susan, there's nothing I can say to take away your pain. When I lost, well, I found it helps to think about them, rather than thinking about our loss. Maybe we could talk about her a little. I never got to know Claire." At the mention of her name, a knot formed in my throat. I didn't want to talk about it. "Where was this?" he asked, pointing at the picture on the end table. "The Knoxville Zoo," I said. "You can see the netting, right there in the corner. That was the toucans. She loved those. The cereal she liked had them on the box, and we spent a long time teaching her how to say toucan. It always came out Kuoka." The whole drive there she was asking sea toucan. I think she was disappointed at first, because it didn't look like the cartoon, but one squawked and flew right by the net, and she loved them after that. I was smiling. I hadn't smiled all day, I don't think. As soon as I realized it, the smile was replaced with sobs. Deep, undignified, wet sobs. Remember those stories. Don't forget them. That's important. After he left, I began putting away dishes. Jeff joined me. You're right. I am glad he came over. I didn't think I would be, but I am. I see why you've been meeting with him. Jeff had talked to Silas alone 2 nights before after the Bible study. He had gotten home late, after midnight. I thought it was a bit strange that he was talking to this man every day of the week, but it seemed to be helping. As I stood at the sink, his arms wrapped around me from behind. I leaned my head back into his chest. Nothing could bring Claire back, but this wasn't the worst night I'd had since Claire passed. At least it wasn't yet. When I woke up, Jeff wasn't in bed. I went to the bathroom and he wasn't there, either. Stepping out of the bedroom, I stood in the dark hall. There was a bright enough moon that light came in through the windows, and I could hear his voice, just barely, through an open door. Claire's room. I walked slowly, my bare feet pressing into the cold hardwood. As I neared, I could make out words. Lord, keep her. Please, Lord, I'll do anything. When I stepped into the doorway, I saw Jeff on his knees, facing the moonlit window. I leaned down to hug him, but saw his arms. With a piece of glass, he had slashed both forearms open, and blood was dripping onto the floor. Jeff! Jeff! I screamed, and he looked up at me over his shoulder, face a mask of grief. I drove him to the hospital. They stitched him up just fine, but both of us had to talk to the doctors for a long time before they would let us go. The car ride back was silence for several minutes. Call the Reverend, Jeff said. He needs to know. When we got home, he handed me his phone and I called him. It was 4 a.m, but I called. Jeff, how'd it go? He said, before I could speak. What? I asked. Susan, hi. How's it going? Sorry, I was asleep. Is everything okay? I took a deep breath. Jeff cut himself pretty bad. I mean, on purpose. I wondered how you're supposed to even say that and figured I'd done it wrong. I see. Do you want me to come over? Or I could stop by in the morning. I didn't know what to say. I'd barely slept. We'd been in the hospital for a couple hours. My daughter was dead, and I was worried my husband was going to kill himself and leave me alone. When I began sobbing, he spoke. You'll be there in half an hour. Just sit tight. Actually, sorry, can you give me your address again? Just so I don't have to look for it. When he arrived, he hugged me as soon as I opened the door. We have to be strong. For Jeff and for Claire. Is the hardest thing in the world, but now is our time to be strong. I put on water for tea, as the Reverend sat with him on the couch. Jeff was already seeming better than I expected. When the kettle whistled, Reverend Silas said he would get it. Once he was in the kitchen, Jeff took my hand. I'm so sorry, honey. I don't know what came over me. I had a dream about her, and when I woke up, it's okay. It's okay. I took his head in my arms, and we both cried. I didn't notice the Reverend come in with the tea until a minute later. When there's a good time, I'd like to pray with him, he said. I could tell he meant just himself and Jeff. I'm going to go upstairs and clean, I said. Susan, please let me. Just get the things together, and I'll clean it in a little while. It's better you don't have to do it yourself. Trust me. I did trust him. I nodded, and went to the kitchen to gather a bucket, gloves, sponges, some detergent. When I returned, the Reverend held Jeff close, speaking in a low voice I couldn't hear. Please come pray with us. Take my hand, Silas said. I knelt on the floor with them, the 3 of us holding hands in a circle. Dear Lord, hear our prayer tonight. Out of our loss, let there be rebirth. He paused, and Jeff repeated after him. I followed his lead. Out of our loss, let there be rebirth. We answered each call. Out of our pain, let there be strength. As you died for us, that we may have life eternal. Let us give of ourselves so that others may live. Amen. Amen, we said. The prayer seemed strange, even at the time, but I wrote it off as stress or exhaustion on the Reverend's part. In hindsight, it took on a very, very different tone. The Reverend slept on our couch, and I made sure he had plenty of blankets. Jeff seemed much better, and we actually got a couple of hours of sleep. The next day, I called work to let them know I would be taking another week. My boss took the phone from our receptionist to personally tell me everything was covered and to take my time. They were good people to work with. The Reverend had set things up for me to have dinner with a couple of people from the Bible study who seemed nice. He wanted someone on one time with Jeff to see if he could facilitate getting professional help. I agreed. Jeff's behavior was worrying me. He said he was feeling much better, but he seemed too much better, too relaxed, too peaceful. I couldn't explain it at the time. I was glad Reverend Silas was trying to get him help. Dinner went well. It was at a woman named Dinah's house, who was very sweet and had cooked some good spaghetti, but was not gifted in conversation. I don't hold that against her, since making conversation with a woman you don't know who has a dead daughter and a self-harming husband seems difficult. As I took a bite of garlic bread, I got a coppery taste in my mouth. It was hard to describe, but it unsettled me, and I excused myself to go to the bathroom. Washing my hands under cold water, I looked in the mirror. I saw not myself, but Claire's face, screaming. It was gone in an instant, but rattled me to my core. She looked terrified, mouth wide open, in a mask of fear which I'd never seen in her few years of life. I've never been superstitious. I've never felt like I had any special closeness with God or spirituality or any of that. But when I saw her, I called Jeff immediately. He didn't answer, neither did the Reverend. I told Dinah thank you for dinner, but that something had come up. I tried calling each of them again, still getting no answer. Putting the car in gear, I drove home much faster than I should have. It was practically asking to hit a deer hauling ass like that at night. The Reverend's car was there, but none of the lights were on. The moon was out and bright again, casting shadows of leafless branches across the white paint of the house. Why weren't the lights on? Why weren't they answering their phones? I rushed up to the front door. It was unlocked. Opening it, I was about to call out for Jeff when I heard a voice speaking. I didn't recognize him at first, but drawing nearer to the stairs, the flat even diction was unmistakable. It was Charles, the Reverend's son, the awkward one with sunglasses. I didn't know he was coming, and might not have thought much of it if the entire house wasn't dark. Charles' voice was coming from upstairs, and I made my way toward it. Moonlight made its way in through the windows, lighting up the thin white curtains, casting shadows from the banister on each of the steps as I slowly ascended them. I could hear the words more clearly now, some sort of prayer. Maybe that was why they had the lights off. An offering, the greatest of which is life. By his sacrifice of body, we are given eternal life of the soul in the kingdom of heaven. Shivers went down my spine. Something was very, very wrong with his voice. I'd never heard anything so cold. I can't explain why, but I snuck toward the voice, not afraid of interrupting the prayer, but afraid that he would notice me. When I found its source, I felt a pang of disgust. They were in Claire's room. The door was open, and each step showed me more of the scene. I saw the Reverend, kneeling with bowed head, hands clasped in prayer. I saw the silhouette of Charles in front of the window, a black outline with hands raised to the sky. Then finally I saw Jeff. He knelt on the floor where I had found him 2 nights before. His blood was still on the ground, dried and black under his knees. There was some kind of circle around him, in what I think was salt. On the floor in front of him was a picture of Claire, but what drew my eye was the gun in his hand, pointed at his temple. You, Jeff, can give the gift of eternal life, a selfless sacrifice, in the eyes of God, for your daughter Claire. Repeat after me. I give my life to you. I give my life to you. I give my soul to you. There was no mistaking what was happening, as horrific and unbelievable as it was. I cried out, desperate. Jeff, no, you can't do this. He turned to me, face half cast in shadow, with tears pouring down his cheeks. I'm so sorry, honey. I can't live without her, but she can live. His voice trembled. Say the words. I give my soul to you. Charles' voice reverberated through the room, deafening, undeniable. I cowered back from the door unintentionally, and heard Jeff begin to speak the words. No, this is wrong, honey. Please, Reverend, stop this. The Reverend looked at me, still kneeling submissively, sadness in his eyes. You can stop them. Not this late. I tried once. I wanted to run to him, to hold him, to take the gun. When I moved forward, Charles stepped toward me, and I froze. Even in the dim light, I could see his eyes. They were glazed, like a corpse's, a haze over his irises and pupils. In the moonlight they glowed. They glowed like the bare skin of someone you loved under the lights of a coroner's table. They glowed like the bones of the last person on earth, under a dying sun. They glowed like death. "You cannot go back. You cannot deny her. Do it, now," Charles ordered. The gunshot flashed, a yellow light contrasting the moon. Jeff crumpled limply to the ground, and I screamed. As I staggered toward him, the Reverend bowed low, placing his palms on the floor. In the center of the salt circle, standing over Jeff, stood a diminutive figure in a dress with curly hair. Her nose was Claire's little nose. Her lips were the small pouty lips of my daughter, which used to kiss me on the cheeks. At her sides hung the tiny soft hands I remembered so well with their little nails. Her eyes looked at me, unfamiliar, with a white luminescence. Story 3. After I moved here, I began to see things no one else could see, and now they know I see them. I came to this town 2 weeks ago for a work assignment. The company I work for sent me here for 6 months, officially to oversee the process. In reality, I was just supposed to be a guy on the ground, present. The production facility was outside the city. It took a little over 30 minutes by bus to get there. A massive, closed-off complex, surrounded by a green zone, a buffer between it and the rest of the world. The town itself was off, gray, no crowds, no youth. The people were polite but dulled, calm in a way that felt almost unnatural, like a wax museum that never melted. I rented a room in a quiet private home. The landlady was tidy, quiet, and almost never asked questions. What struck me was that almost none of the locals worked at the factory. Everyone I met there was from somewhere else. They'd also been sent in, some for a month, some for a season. Locals stuck to renting out rooms, fixing things, running small stores. It was like they avoided contact with the plant, even though it clearly paid for most of the town. It felt odd, but I had no reason to ask questions. The pay stunned me, higher than I'd expected. At first I thought I'll finish my 6 months, go home and forget this place. But something about the rhythm pulled me in. Not the town. It felt cold, cardboard, unreal, but the rhythm of the factory. We worked in shifts. The schedule was strict, but simple. Shift, sleep, canteen, shift. There was a strange calm to it. Time moved differently. Everyone kept busy. The kind of busy where no one makes eye contact, where silence is part of the job. About a month before my term was up, I met the new floor supervisor. Had just arrived. A real field commander type. Sharp, fast, no small talk. But he appreciated how I worked. Genuinely. One night after a shift, we stayed behind in the break room. Someone brought a bottle. We talked. And he said, "Stay longer. The guys are good. The money's better. I'll cover your shifts. We'll backdate the paperwork. If no one asks, no one knows." I laughed, but I didn't say no. The next day, I didn't go home. Technically, HR should have known I was done, but the system listed another 2 weeks for wrap-up. And in a place like this, with hundreds of temps, no one checks unless something goes wrong. So I stayed. Just a little longer, I thought. A month, maybe 2, until autumn. I didn't know that autumn wouldn't end. Not really. One day I caught a smell. Not smoke. Not garbage. Raw meat. That first time I was just walking down the street. I couldn't tell where it was coming from. Then I turned into the courtyard of an apartment block and saw a coffin. They were carrying it out. The smell was strongest there, and it felt like I was the only one who noticed. Once the coffin was gone, the smell vanished. Now and then, I caught it again. Always near something. An ambulance. A funeral van. The hospital gates. And then came the man on the bus. I didn't see him bored. I was sitting by the exit, half asleep, when I felt a hand grab my shoulder. Cold. Thin, bony, like a skeleton's. He wore a heavy antique ring. I tried to shout, "What are you doing? Let go," but nothing came out. I was frozen. He stared at me. No emotion, no words. The other passengers didn't react, didn't even blink. When the bus stopped, he stood up, stepped off, and walked down the street. Only when he turned the corner and disappeared between the unmoving figures ahead. I could breathe again. I could move. I told myself it was a one-off, sleep deprivation, something rational. But then it got worse. The next day I was in a minibus after a night shift, barely staying awake. Then I saw the car. It passed us quickly, and there, standing on its roof, was a woman. Completely naked, skin pale, almost gray. Her hair was braided into a single, long plait, long enough to drag across the trunk. She didn't move, didn't sway, Didn't hold on. Just stood there, like gravity didn't apply to her. No one reacted, except me. The car passed and vanished into traffic. I almost jumped out after it. A day later, I saw her again, on the news. Same car, same make. Crash. Everyone dead. After the crash, I stopped taking the minibuses. I started walking instead, even though the factory was far, an hour on foot, sometimes more. But I couldn't sit there anymore, surrounded by those faces that didn't blink, didn't shift, didn't even breathe properly. They looked like figures, like something had already taken them and their bodies hadn't gotten the message yet. I tried talking to someone about it. An engineer who had worked in the same section since day one. Good guy, down to earth. A dry sense of humor, no drama. When I told him about what I'd seen, he just stood there, silent at first, and then he said quietly, "Don't look," and walked away. The next week he was gone. Just gone. Someone else was listed in his spot. I asked our shift supervisor. His term was up, he said. But the guy told me himself he'd be staying until October. It was only August. I went to check HR. They couldn't find him. Not in the logs, not in the system. Like he'd never been there at all. That's when I started to get it. The ones who see, they don't last long. The ones who stay quiet, stay longer, much longer. One evening I passed the factory gates. I wasn't working that day, just walking. There was a service bus parked by the entrance. Empty. Except it wasn't. Someone was sitting inside, alone. I couldn't see the face, just a silhouette. I stepped closer, and then I saw him. The man from the bus, the one with the cold hand. He was sitting completely still, like a wax figure. And then, he looked right at me. The bus doors were closed, but I heard it clearly, a voice. "You're here now." And the streetlights flickered off. I woke up in my room. I couldn't tell if it had been a dream or something else entirely. I couldn't take it anymore. I went to see the one person I trusted, the same supervisor who'd once asked me to stay. He listened, didn't interrupt, just waited until I was done, and asked, "How long have you been here?" I had to think. Well, 3 months past my term, plus the 6, about 9. He nodded. "Go to the infirmary. I already called." The doctor was old, but agile, firm hands, sharp eyes. He spent a long time checking my lungs, my pupils, my pulse. Then he sighed. "You should have been discharged. Your contract ended. Everything you did past that, you weren't supposed to be on the schedule." I didn't get to reply. He was already on the phone. "Bring a car. Immediately." 10 minutes later it arrived. Black. Unmarked. They didn't say a word. Just put me inside and drove. We went far, out of town, and then farther still. It was a clinic. Not a psych ward exactly, but something in between. Private. Guarded. Barbed wire. Steel doors. There they explained it all. Hallucinations. Vapor exposure. Toxic accumulation. Delayed effect. No lasting damage. No permanent condition. Just rehabilitation. They kept me there for 3 months. During that time I saw nothing strange, but I was warned, strictly, not to mention what I'd seen. They told me if I started spreading delusions among the others, they'd transfer me to a dedicated facility. I agreed to everything. I just wanted out. When I was released, I went home. I never tried contacting anyone from the factory again. There were no smells, no stares on public transport. The streets looked normal. Sleep came easily. But I still don't know what happened. What did I really see? Was it real or just part of what they remove from you once you stay too long? I still don't know if there's something wrong with that town or with me. Story 4. I took a shortcut through the woods. There's a house that shouldn't be there. I'm not the kind of person who scares easy. I've worked night shifts, done backcountry solo hikes, even spent a year volunteering at a crisis hotline. But what I saw 2 nights ago, I still don't have words for it. I've tried calling friends, trying to explain, but every time I start, I feel like I'm unraveling. So I'm writing it here, because if I don't, I'll start to believe none of it happened. That's how it gets you. It started with a shortcut. I was driving home after visiting my mom. Small town, middle of nowhere, 2-hour trip through winding mountain roads. It was late, foggy. My phone was at 4%. The GPS cut out 10 minutes after I lost signal, and I missed a turn somewhere. I figured I'd just backtrack. That's when I saw the old wooden sign nailed to a pine tree. Miller's Path Logging Trail, no through road. You'd heard of Miller's Path before. My uncle used to tell stories about it when I was a kid. Said it was an old lumber route from the 40s. Abandoned. Leads to nowhere. Fast, he'd say. Don't go trying to find shortcuts through bones. I thought he was just being dramatic. I turned onto the trail. The road was barely wide enough for my car. Rutted dirt, tree branches clawing at the windows. Fog so thick I had to crawl forward at 5 miles per hour. Every so often I thought I saw lights through the trees. Flickers. Nothing steady. Just enough to make me feel like I wasn't alone. Then the engine sputtered. No warning. No check engine light. Just a lurch and a sound like someone inhaling through wet cloth. Then silence. I tried the ignition. Nothing. I checked my phone. Dead. No signal. No bars. No battery. That was when I heard it. Not an animal. Not wind. Music. Faint. Like an old phonograph. Tinny and distant. A woman's voice. Slow and warbling. Let the pine be your cradle. Let the moss be your bed. I thought maybe someone lived out here. A cabin maybe. A ranger station. So I grabbed my flashlight and stepped out. The forest was too quiet. You don't realize how much noise trees usually make until they don't. No rustling. No crickets. No wind. Just the sound of my boots in the dirt. And that voice, getting louder. I followed it. The path twisted deeper through the trees. The fog didn't let up. In fact, it got thicker, like it was clinging to me. My skin started to itch. My throat felt dry. The deeper I went, the more I felt like I was being watched. That's when I saw the house. 2 stories. White paint peeling off in long, curling strips. A porch sagging in the middle. Windows too dark for the light coming from inside. And there was light. Candlelight. Flickering through the cracks in the shutters. The front door was wide open. The song was louder now, echoing from inside. The roots will rise, and the worms will feed. I called out, no answer. So I stepped inside. The air was wrong. Heavy. Wet. Like stepping into a storm cellar that hadn't been opened in decades. The wallpaper was rotted, curling at the seams. Floorboards bowed underfoot. But everything else looked untouched. Not dusty. Not abandoned. Lived in. There were shoes by the door. A coat hung on the rack. A tea kettle whistled softly on a wood-burning stove in the kitchen. I stepped into the living room. That's when I saw her. Sitting in a rocking chair, facing the window. Pale blue dress. Hair long and tangled. Her skin looked wrong. Too thin, almost translucent, like wax held over a flame. The song was coming from her mouth, but her lips didn't move. Just that voice, slow and distant. Close your eyes and lay below, where time forgets and shadows grow. Ma'am? I asked. She didn't turn around. Then the chair stopped rocking. Just froze. The song stopped too. I was about to turn and leave when she finally spoke. Not with her mouth. The words weren't sound. They were inside my head, like pressure behind my eyes. You weren't invited. Every hair on my body stood up. I stepped back. The floor groaned beneath me. Then the walls breathed. I swear to God, they inhaled, bulging outward, the wallpaper pulsing like skin. The lights flickered, and shadows poured from the corners like spilled ink. I turned and ran, but the door was gone. Just wall. Seamless. I spun, trying to find another exit, but every window was bricked over from the inside. The house had changed. Grown. The furniture was gone now. The floorboards under my feet writhed like they were alive. Then I heard the footsteps. Not hers. Something heavier, dragging, from the stairs above. Each step groaned with the weight of whatever was coming down. I ducked into the hallway, heart slamming against my ribs. Found a door, slammed it shut behind me, and clicked on the flashlight. It didn't help. The room was lined with mirrors, floor to ceiling, dozens of them, but none showed me. They showed versions of the room, but not me. Other people, standing alone, each one pale and shaking. One was missing a hand, another bled from the eyes. One looked almost like me, but older, tired. His eyes were wrong, flat. Then they started to move. Not the mirrors, the people inside them. They all looked up at once, and smiled. That's when I heard it again. "Sleep now, child. Beneath the pine." It was behind me. I turned. The woman from the chair was in the room now, but her mouth still wasn't moving. Her face, it wasn't right. The longer I looked, the less sense it made. Her features swam eyes where her cheeks should be. Too many teeth, no nose. She reached for me with arms that were too long. I threw myself against the nearest mirror. It cracked, but didn't break. The version of me inside stared back, mouthed something. "Wake up." I slammed the flashlight against the glass. The mirror shattered and the wall behind it opened. I ran. The house didn't fight me this time. Doors opened where they hadn't been before. Stairs led downward instead of up. I don't know how long I ran. Time didn't make sense. Everything smelled like rust and old milk. When I finally burst out into the forest, the fog was gone. So was the house. No sign of it, no foundation, just trees. I ran back to the road. My car was there, still cold, still dead, but it was real. I sat inside and waited for morning. When the sun came up, the engine started on the first try. I drove until I hit signal and called my uncle. He listened, didn't interrupt. When I finished, all he said was, "What did the pine smell like?" I didn't answer. I already knew he'd been there too. I don't know what that house is, or why it let me leave. But last night, I found something in my apartment. A scrap of wallpaper. It smells like soil. And this morning, my hallway was 2 feet longer than it should be. I measured it. Twice. I think the house came with me. And I don't think it's done yet. Story 5. There's a reason I don't sleep with the door open anymore. I haven't talked about this in years, not even to my therapist, but I'm writing it down now because last night at 2:12 a.m., I heard the knock again. Same rhythm, same pause, the same sick feeling crawling up the back of my throat. I used to think it was a demon. I know how that sounds, but when you're a kid, there are things you just know without proof. You don't question why your closet makes you nauseous, or why the attic door feels like it's breathing. You just know something's wrong. And something was very wrong in that house. We moved in when I was 9, old Victorian at the edge of a dead-end street, sloped floors, wallpaper like dried blood. My mom called it a fresh start. She had just gotten serious with a new boyfriend, Rick. He helped pay for the place but stayed in the city at first, so for a while it was just me and her. The first night I couldn't sleep. Normal new house stuff, I thought, until I heard it. Knock. Just one. Soft, like someone gently tapped their knuckle against my door. I sat up in bed, listening hard. Knock. Knock. 3 more. Spaced out. Deliberate. Then silence. I got up and opened the door. The hallway was empty. I asked my mom in the morning if she had checked on me. She said no. She looked tired. Her hands were shaking when she poured her coffee. I noticed a red mark on her neck. She said it was a bug bite. That night I stacked books against the door, just in case. The knocking came again, same time around 2 a.m., but this time it didn't stop. It turned into scraping, like nails dragging across the door, then breathing, wet and slow, right up against the wood. I heard it say something I didn't understand, too low, too garbled. And then I smelled it, rot, like something dead had been stuffed under the floorboards. I didn't sleep, just stared at the door, flashlight clutched tight. In the morning, my mom had a bruise on her arm, purple and angry, like someone had grabbed her too hard. She said she tripped on the stairs. She wouldn't meet my eyes when she said it. It kept happening. Some nights it tried the doorknob. Other nights I'd hear it crawl across the hall, and once I heard crying, soft, broken sobs, like someone trying not to be heard. Sometimes it came for me, sometimes it didn't, but someone always got hurt. The worst was when I forgot to block the door. I was half asleep when I heard the slow creak of it opening. I froze, pulled the covers over my head. Something stepped into the room. It didn't walk right, too heavy, too slow. The mattress dipped beside me, and it breathed. Right in my face, hot, sour, and wrong. Then, finally, it left. In the morning I had scratches across my back, through my shirt. I didn't tell my mom. She already looked like she was unraveling. Eventually Rick moved in. Just showed up one day with his bags, and that looked like he belonged there all along. The weird part, the knocking stopped. But the house didn't feel safer. It felt worse. colder, heavier, and my mom seemed even more withdrawn. I started having dreams, the something watching me from the hallway, tall and thin with no face, just a mouth full of too many teeth. Sometimes I woke up with bruises, sometimes with dirt under my nails. Once, I woke up outside, lying on the porch, barefoot. My hands were bleeding. I told my mom we had to leave. She cried, said she'd find a way. That night, she locked her bedroom door, and I waited. 2:09 a.m. Footsteps. They didn't stop outside my door this time. They kept going, toward hers. I heard her murmur something, confused, half asleep. "Rick?" Then a crash, and a scream, then silence. I ran to her room. The door was open just enough. Inside, in the dark, something was crouched over her, tall, wrong. It held her down, hands wrapped around her wrists. She was fighting, kicking, sobbing. And then it turned to me, and grinned. I didn't think. I ran to the kitchen, grabbed the biggest knife I could find. When I came back, it was still on top of her. I screamed, ran forward, and drove the blade into its back. Again, and again, and again, until it slumped to the floor. My mom was screaming at me. I looked down. It wasn't a monster. No claws. No fangs. Just a man. Just Rick. His face was caved in, one eye open, one shut, lips split like someone had tried to tear the truth out of them. The police came, said it was self-defense, said I saved her. But she never looked at me again. We moved out of the house. She never spoke to me after that. Years later, I still don't sleep with the door open. I live alone now, one-bedroom apartments, 3rd floor, no creaks, no attic, no shadows in the hallway. Still, last night I woke up at 2:12 a.m. Knock, 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 tap, and a voice behind the door. Not growling, not whispering, just tired. Why? Edit. This morning I found something under my bed. My old flashlight, cracked, the one I used to keep under my pillow, still faintly glowing, and it smells like cigarette smoke. Story 6. My hiking channel's latest footage is a corrupted nightmare. I need to tell you what the camera didn't capture near that abandoned house. I run a small YouTube channel, mostly focusing on scenic hikes and exploring off-the-beaten-path locations. It's usually just about appreciating nature, finding old ruins, that sort of thing. This time I found something else. I need to write this down, partly to warn others, partly just to get it out of my head, though I doubt it'll ever truly leave. It started like any other day trip. I'd picked a lesser-known trail system in a fairly remote mountain range, hoping to get some unique footage. The initial hike was beautiful, strenuous, but rewarding. Sunlight dappled through the canopy, birds were chirping, the usual idyllic stuff. I pushed further than I usually would, drawn by the promise of a ridge view I'd seen on a very old, very unreliable map. By late afternoon, the clouds had started to roll in, and the temperature dropped. I knew I should probably turn back, but I was deep in, and the thought of backtracking all that way was disheartening. I figured I'd press on a little more, then maybe find a quicker, if steeper route down another face of the mountain, if the weather turned really sour. That's when I first noticed the lack of trail markers. I'd been following what I thought was a faint game trail, but it had completely petered out. The woods here were dense, older, the kind where the undergrowth is sparse because so little light gets through. It was getting dim, and a prickle of unease started. I wasn't lost. Not exactly. I have a good sense of direction, and my GPS was working, but I was definitely off any charted path. After another 20 minutes of careful navigation, pushing through some thickets of rhododendron, I stumbled into a small, unexpected clearing, and in the center of it stood a house. It wasn't a ruin, not like the crumbling stone foundations I sometimes film. This was a 2-story wooden house, clapboard style, with a porch and glass in most of the windows. It was old, clearly, paint peeling in places, a slight sag to the porch roof, but it looked intact. Maintained, almost. There was no driveway, no path leading to it that I could see, just the wild forest pressing in on all sides of this small, strangely manicured patch of land immediately around it. The grass in this yard-like area was short, almost like it had been recently cut, which was the first really odd thing. My YouTuber brain immediately kicked in. Abandoned house in the middle of nowhere. Content gold. I pulled out my camera, checked the battery, and started filming an intro talking about being off trail, the unexpected find, the usual spiel. I even made a joke about it being a horror movie setup. If only I'd known. The camera, though, seemed to be acting a little strangely from the get-go. The autofocus kept hunting, and there was a faint, almost imperceptible flicker on the preview screen that I put down to the low light. As I got closer, the strangeness amplified. The air around the house felt still, unnaturally so. The usual forest sounds, insects, rustling leaves, distant birds, seemed muted here, as if the clearing existed in a pocket of silence. The house itself, though weathered, was incredibly clean. No cobwebs in the corners of the porch eaves. The windows, though a bit grimy, weren't shattered or boarded up. The front door was closed but not locked. I hesitated for a moment, a genuine flicker of should I passing through me, but the lure of exploration, of capturing something unique for the channel, was too strong. I pushed the door open. It creaked, but not in a dramatic, spooky way. More like a door that hadn't been opened in a week or two. The smell that hit me wasn't dust and decay, which is what you expect from an abandoned place. It smelled faintly of lemon polish and old wood, a clean, almost domestic smell. I stepped inside, camera rolling, narrating my observations in a low voice. The interior was even more baffling. A small entryway led into a living room. There was furniture, a sofa, a couple of armchairs, a coffee table, a rag rug on the wooden floor, and it was all pristine. Not new, but impeccably clean. No dust on the coffee table, no grime on the upholstery, though it was faded and old-fashioned. It looked like someone had been there, tidying up, maybe an hour ago. When I checked the footage later, this section is a mess. It's grainy, oversaturated in weird patches, and the audio is filled with a low, warbling hum. I swear I didn't hear at the time. You can barely make out what I'm saying. "This is incredibly well preserved," I whispered, trying to keep the camera steady. Or not preserved, lived in. But who would live out here so far from everything? I moved through the ground floor, a dining room with a table and chairs. Place settings still on the table, simple ceramic plates. Cutlery, again, spotless. A kitchen, small and dated, but the counters were wiped clean. No food out, no dirty dishes. Even the sink faucet gleamed faintly in the dim light filtering through the window. It was deeply, profoundly unsettling. This wasn't abandonment. This was absence. Sudden absence. The camera seemed to really struggle in the kitchen. The footage shows strobing light effects and digital artifacts that obscure most of the details I remember so vividly. The feeling that the occupants had just left was overwhelming. Like they'd heard me approach and slipped out the back door, or were hiding upstairs, listening. I called out, "Hello? Is anyone here?" My voice sounded loud, intrusive in the quiet. Only silence answered. On the recording, my call is distorted, almost demonic sounding, followed by a burst of white noise. On the mantelpiece in the living room and on a small side table were framed photographs. I remember trying to zoom in with my camera. They showed a family, a man, mid-40s perhaps, with kind eyes and a receding hairline, a woman, a bit younger, with a warm smile and dark wavy hair, and a little girl, maybe 7 or 8, with pigtails and a gap-toothed grin. They looked happy, normal. In one photo, they were standing in front of this very house, the man with his arm around the woman, the girl holding a flower. The footage of these photos is useless. Blurry, pixelated messes where the faces should be, as if the camera refused to capture them clearly. I only have my memory of their smiles. "Okay, so people definitely lived here," I murmured, frustrated with the camera's apparent inability to focus. "But where are they? And why is this place so immaculate?" A knot of anxiety was tightening in my stomach. This wasn't fun, adventurous exploration anymore. This felt wrong. The cleanliness was illogical. A house this remote, left unattended for even a short while, would show signs of nature reclaiming it, or at least the dust of disuse. This felt like a stage set, meticulously prepared, waiting. I decided to check upstairs. The stairs creaked under my weight, each step echoing in the silence. I kept my camera light on, sweeping it around, though the beam seemed weaker than usual and flickered. 2 bedrooms and a small bathroom. The first bedroom was clearly the parents'. A large double bed, neatly made, quilts smoothed down, a dresser, a wardrobe. On the nightstand, a pair of reading glasses lay next to a closed book. Again, no dust. It was as if someone had just stepped out. The footage here is almost entirely black, with occasional flashes of what might be furniture. The second bedroom was the child's. A small bed with a brightly colored patchwork quilt. A few stuffed animals arranged on a shelf, their button eyes seeming to watch me. A child's drawing was taped to the wall. A stick figure family under a yellow sun, standing beside a very large, very green tree. There was something almost disproportionate about the tree in the drawing, its trunk thick, its branches reaching over the family like protective arms, or encompassing ones. I tried to film the drawing, but the playback just shows a chaotic jumble of colors. My unease was growing into genuine fear. The silence, the order, the sense of recent, unexplained departure, it was all too much. I wasn't an investigator. I was a hiker with a camera that was rapidly becoming useless, and I was way out of my depth. It was in the master bedroom, on that dresser, tucked slightly under a small tarnished silver jewelry box, that I found the note. It was a single sheet of folded paper, yellowed with age, but the ink was dark and clear to my eyes. It wasn't a letter in the traditional sense. It looked more like a page from a journal or a prayer. I picked it up, my fingers trembling slightly, and unfolded it. I tried to film it as I read. The handwriting was neat, masculine, possibly the father's from the photos. My memory of the words is seared into me, but the footage, it's a complete wash. Static, scrolling bars of color, and a high-pitched whine that makes my teeth ache to listen to. I can only recall what I read, what I saw with my own eyes. The hunger is great today. It whispers through the roots, through the floorboards. We offer what we can. We are grateful for its shade, for its enduring presence. It was here before us. It will be hereafter. The little one is strong. She feels it more keenly now. This is good. The communion must be complete for her to truly flourish under its boughs. It demands patience. It demands faith. The growth provides. The growth takes. We give ourselves to the growth, so that we may become part of its eternity. It asks for stillness, for quiet nourishment. We must be still. We must be silent. Soon we will all be rooted, unchanging, forever part of its design. Blessed be the growth. May its reach extend. May its thirst be quenched. A cold dread washed over me, so intense it made me feel nauseous. The growth. What in God's name was the growth? The tree in the child's drawing flashed in my mind, oversized, dominant. The language of the note, hunger, whispers through the roots, communion, rooted. It was deeply disturbing. This wasn't a quaint, abandoned farmhouse. This was something else, something sinister. The air in the room suddenly felt heavy, oppressive. I could hear my own breathing, loud and ragged in my ears. The feeling of being watched intensified, not by human eyes, but by something pervasive. The house itself felt like it was holding its breath. "Okay, I'm done. I'm getting out of here," I said, my voice shaky. The camera, I realized, had stopped recording on its own. The little red light was off. I fumbled to turn it back on, a fresh wave of panic rising. This is too much. This note. This place. I need to leave. I backed out of the bedroom, not wanting to turn my back on the empty space. I practically ran down the stairs, the creaks now sounding like accusations. I didn't bother looking around anymore, just headed straight for the front door, jabbing at the record button on my camera, hoping it would work. My hand was on the doorknob when I heard it, a faint sound from upstairs, a soft, almost sighing creak, like a floorboard settling, or someone shifting their weight. I didn't wait. I wrenched the door open and burst out onto the porch, then half jumped, half fell down the steps into the clearing. The fading daylight seemed dimmer than before, the shadows longer and deeper. I didn't look back at the house. I just aimed for the edge of the clearing, the point where I thought I'd entered, and plunged back into the trees, camera clutched in my hand, hoping it was capturing something. The relief of being out of that house was immense, but short-lived. The forest, which had seemed merely dense before, now felt menacing. Every shadow seemed to writhe. Every rustle of leaves sounded like stealthy movement. The note about the growth and roots kept replaying in my mind. I glanced at the trees around me with a new horrified suspicion. They were just trees, of course. Weren't they? I pushed through the undergrowth, trying to get as much distance as possible between myself and that clearing. My heart was still hammering. I told myself it was just an old creepy house. A family with some strange beliefs. Maybe they just moved on, hired someone to keep the place clean for some reason. But the note didn't fit any rational explanation. I must have gone 100 yards, maybe more, when I passed a particularly dense cluster of ancient-looking oaks, their branches gnarled and intertwined, forming a thick canopy even in the fading light. as I was pushing past the last of the tree line around the house's clearing, and then a sound stopped me dead. A voice. Faint. Weak. Almost like the whisper of wind, but with a cadence that was unmistakably human. Help. Me. I froze. My blood ran cold. It was so soft I almost convinced myself I'd imagined it. But then it came again, a little clearer, laden with desperation. Please help. It seemed to be coming from my left, from deeper within that same cluster of old trees I was just passing. Against every instinct screaming at me to run, some morbid curiosity, or perhaps a deeply buried sense of obligation, made me turn. My camera was still in my hand. I pointed it blindly, desperately hoping to capture whatever this was. I took a few hesitant steps towards the sound, peering into the gloomy tangle of trunks and low-hanging branches. "Hello?" I called out, my voice a mere croak. "Here, please," the voice replied, a little stronger, guiding me. And then I saw it, or rather, her. It was one of the large oaks, its trunk thicker than any I'd seen that day, ancient and deeply fissured, and fused into it, as if the tree had grown around her, or she had grown into it, was a woman. My mind simply refused to process it for a second. It was the woman from the photographs in the house. Her dark, wavy hair was matted and streaked with something that looked like moss. Her face, pale and drawn, was turned towards me. Her eyes wide with a mixture of terror and a horrifying, resigned emptiness. Her skin, where it was visible, had a strange bark-like texture, dry and discolored, blending almost seamlessly with the wood of the tree. Her arms were not visible, nor her lower body. They seemed to have been entirely consumed, incorporated into the vast trunk. Only her torso, shoulders, and head were distinguishable, yet even these were deeply embedded. She looked drained, changed. I let out a small, choked gasp. I couldn't speak, couldn't move. Her lips, cracked and pale, moved. "Help me, please." Her voice was a dry rustle, like dead leaves. I finally found my voice, though it was trembling uncontrollably. What happened to you? Who did this?" A flicker of something unreadable passed through her eyes. "The growth. It took us. It keeps us. Nourishment." The words were halting, weak. Each one seemed an immense effort. "The family, your husband, your daughter?" I managed to ask, the images from the photos, however vague in my memory of the actual prints, searing my mind. Her gaze shifted slightly, as if looking past me, or through me. "He welcomed it. He brought it to us. He's rooted deep. He sleeps now." A tear thick and slow like sap welled in her eye, and traced a path down her bark-like cheek. "My daughter. She's still aware. It wants her fresh. Please, you have to help her." "Help her? How? Where is she?" I stammered, my mind reeling, trying to comprehend the impossible horror before me. How could I help? What could I possibly do against this? The woman's eyes darted frantically, not at me, but somewhere behind me, back towards the direction of the house, or perhaps just into the deeper woods. Her breath hitched. "It's coming." "Who? What's coming?" I whispered, a primal fear seizing me. I didn't dare turn around. Suddenly I heard it, faint. At first, the sound of soft, deliberate steps on the forest floor behind me. Twigs snapping gently, leaves rustling, not by wind, but by passage. My skin crawled. The sound was unhurried, almost casual, which made it all the more terrifying. The woman in the tree saw the terror on my face, or perhaps she heard it too, more acutely. Her eyes, already wide, stretched impossibly wider. A raw, guttural sound tore from her throat, no longer just a plea for help, but a scream of pure, unadulterated terror. "No, please, stop," she shrieked, her gaze locked on whatever was approaching behind me. "Leave him. Don't let it—" Her voice cut off, gurgling. I didn't wait to see what it was. I didn't look back. That scream, that final desperate stop, aimed not at me, but at whatever was behind me, shattered the last of my horrified paralysis. I ran. I'd never run like that in my life. Blind panic fueled me. Branches whipped at my face. Roots threatened to trip me, but I didn't care. I just ran, lungs burning, heart feeling like it would explode from my chest. The sounds of pursuit, whether real or imagined, I don't know. I think I heard those soft steps for a while, keeping pace, or maybe it was just the blood pounding in my ears. I didn't dare to check. The woman's scream, her changed face, the father's note about the growth, it all swirled into a nightmare montage in my head. I ran in what I hoped was the general direction of the main trail, back towards where I'd left my car. I have no idea how long I ran. It felt like an eternity. Every shadow a threat, every sound a pursuer. I didn't stop, didn't slow, just kept pushing, stumbling, scrambling through the dense woods. The light was almost completely gone now. The forest plunged into deep twilight. Finally, through sheer dumb luck or some ingrained navigational instinct, I burst out of the trees onto something familiar, the switchback of the trail I'd been on hours earlier. I've never been so relieved to see a marked path. I still didn't stop running. I practically flew down the trail, my hiking poles, still strapped to my pack, clattering uselessly. It must have been another hour, maybe more, of this desperate flight before I finally reached the trailhead, the small gravel parking lot where my car was. It was the most beautiful sight I'd ever seen. I fumbled with my keys, hands shaking so violently I could barely get the key in the ignition. The engine roared to life, and I slammed it into reverse, spun the car around and sped out of there, gravel spraying behind me. I didn't look in my rearview mirror until I was miles away, on the main highway. I drove straight home, a multi-hour drive without stopping. I didn't even realize I still had the camera clutched in my hand until I was unlocking my front door. Later, with a sickening sense of dread, I tried to check the SD card. It was almost entirely corrupted. The files were there, but they were unplayable, full of digital noise, static blocks of distorted color, and horrifying, garbled audio. There are moments, tiny fractions of seconds, where I think I can make out a shape, a distorted sound that might be a word, but nothing concrete. Nothing to prove what I saw in that house, what I read in that note, or the abomination I encountered by that tree. It's all gone, lost to some kind of digital decay I can't explain. It's as if the place itself, or whatever resides there, actively fought against being recorded. I haven't been able to sleep properly since. Every time I close my eyes, I see her face, fused into that tree. I hear her voice, begging for help, then screaming. The growth. What was it? Some kind of sentient parasitic plant entity, a local deity they worshipped until it consumed them. And what was coming for me? The father, rooted deep, but somehow mobile, or the growth itself? The lack of any footage makes it worse. Somehow, it's just my word, my fractured memory against the silence. Sometimes I even start to doubt myself, to wonder if the stress and the isolation of being off trail made me imagine the worst of it. But then I remember the cold dread, the smell of lemon polish, the feel of that note in my hands, and the sheer primal terror of that final scream. No, it was real. I haven't gone back to those woods. I don't think I'll ever go hiking alone in a remote area again. Story 7. Every time something feels off, I wonder if I've slipped into an alternate universe again. I miss my husband. I sat crouched on the stairs, peering out from behind the wall, watching the man having breakfast at our dining room table. The man I married 2 years ago held a steaming coffee mug up to his lips, taking slow, short sips. On the other hand, he held a book, flipping a page occasionally. He didn't seem to notice I was there. He was just sitting there as if everything had been completely normal. The man gently set down his mug and brought his elbow to the table to rest his head on his hand, now looking away from me. The spread of food on the table was now cold. He had been waiting for me to come downstairs for almost 20 minutes. I narrowed my eyes at him and took a deep breath, careful to exhale slowly. I didn't want him to notice me. He lifted his head from his hand and set down the mug, leaning back into the chair. He shook his head. The layers in his black-brown hair swayed side to side before setting back down at the nape of his neck. I stared for a while longer, unable to find any inconsistencies. He definitely looked like my husband. Everything about him was right. His choice of coffee and pancakes. The way his eyebrows formed a slight frown as he stared at the book, even down to his stupid hair flip. He always flipped his hair like that. I stretched my legs in front of me and pressed down on the step with my hands. Maybe I was imagining it. I stared down at my legs. I had been known to be suspicious at times. The feeling that something was wrong was not foreign to me. This feeling and the events surrounding it had been a recurring theme in my life for as long as I could remember. When I was 10, I fell from a tree. My brother and I had been playing outside all day and decided to race to the top of an oak tree at the edge of our property. My brother, being older, had gotten the lead, and I, being desperate to catch up, decided I would leap from branch to branch. I was about halfway up the tree when I felt my foot slip, and suddenly I fell forward almost 12 feet down and landed on my shoulder. My vision went dark. My mom stood over me when I woke up, shaking me lightly. I looked around, but I was laying on my living room floor. Apparently I had taken a nap on the couch and fell. I never climbed a tree, and my brother had been at his friend's house all day. That was my mom's story, but that's not what really happened. Similarly, when I was 14, we picked up the family car from the shop. I commented how it was possible that the paint had faded so much, making the once black car appear navy blue. Apparently, it had always been navy blue, except it hadn't. It wasn't until the night of my senior prom that I put everything together. At the dance, my then boyfriend and I had gotten into a fight. I decided to call my parents. My dad picked up the phone groggily, having just been dead asleep, and agreed to come get me. When I climbed into the car with my father, who had not managed to make it out of his pajamas, he asked if I wanted to talk. I didn't, so for a long time we drove home in complete silence. I watched the road as the car maneuvered through the winding back roads, the darkness being lit up only by the car's headlights and the occasional dim streetlight. Suddenly, what looked like a dog flashed across the street in front of us and dashed into the woods. My dad slammed on the brakes and the car came to a screeching halt. He insisted he had to get out and check if the dog was okay. He got out and walked out of my sight, past the range of the headlights into the pitch blackness in front of us. I waited anxiously, my eyes locked on the area where I last saw him, and after what felt like an eternity, a figure emerged and strode quickly to the car. It was a man. This man wore my dad's dress shirt and pants with his lanyard and ID card around his neck. He made his way to the driver's side and got in, looking at me. "I guess it ran off. I didn't see it," he said. I felt the hair on the back of my neck stand up. I wasn't sure how long or loud I screamed before realizing I could not breathe. My throat felt tight and I had to focus to take a deep breath. Throughout this, the man looked at me with a shocked expression, holding his hands up trying to calm me, and finally he did. Once the initial shock wore off and I had a moment to compose myself, I realized what this meant. At some point in the day, I had made a choice, either minor or major, that had led me to swap realities. I was now in a dimension almost like my own, where the only difference was that my father had worked late. I miss my dad, the real one anyway. I wondered if I was with a fake dad, then was fake me with my real dad. Had she screamed seeing a man in pajamas climb into the car? Had she put the pieces together the same way I did? I hated this feeling. It was this very feeling that had motivated me to tell Alex of my fear of these alternate universes. The places that almost felt right if it weren't for an unpleasant tinge of unease. I didn't know what caused these universe shifts, and I was scared. The differences in these universes were never major. People always had the same jobs, same spouses, and same personalities. Usually it was the placement of their furniture, a different mannerism, or a forgotten memory, a memory that should have been important enough to remain the same. Before we were married, I had explained to him my thoughts, and together we established a way to determine whether one of us had shifted universes. A password of sorts, a sequence of numbers we would say to be sure we were still in the same place. Every morning sometime while getting ready for work, I would call out the numbers to him and he would repeat them back to me. Every single morning, but as you can imagine, today was the day our unofficial routine changed. When I woke up, he was already out of bed. I thought it was strange, but heard him shifting downstairs and moving plates and silverware. I began dressing and fixing my hair in the mirror and called out to him. "Alex, 1052. I paused and waited for his response. "What?" Alex called back. Except this wasn't Alex. Alex wouldn't have said what he would have said, 1052. A chill ran up my spine as my eyes began searching the bedroom. Everything seemed to be in its rightful place, so I called the number a second time. The reply that came was a more high-pitched and drawn out, "What?" somehow stretching the word into 2 syllables. My heart sank into my chest, and suddenly I felt very cold. Why was he downstairs anyway? We always made breakfast together. That was when I decided to tiptoe downstairs and look at who was in our kitchen. I'd been sitting here since. My eyes shifted from my legs to my shoes. The black flats I wore to work every day had scrapes and scratches all down the sides. They hadn't looked like that yesterday. I worked in an office. How would I even get so many scuffs? "What are you doing?" I jolted backward as a gasp escaped my throat. I wanted to scream and run, but I was frozen in place. I stared up at the man before me, unable to breathe, my heart racing in my chest. "What's wrong?" he said, looking behind him and then back at me. His expression was somewhere between worried and confused. "Why didn't you say it back?" My voice came out shaky. He stared at me for a moment before frowning and lowering his chin. "Ela?" he said while lowering himself to my eye level. "Are you okay?" His eyes scanned my face. "How do I know you're still you?" I said. If you don't say it back. He tilted his head slightly and his eyes softened. Is this about your reality shifting again? He said, his mouth forming a slight smile. I studied his face, his pupils dilating as he stared back at me, still smiling, awaiting my response. This had to be Alex. What else would it be about? I said, breaking eye contact. Come on, Aaliyah. I told you not to worry about that anymore. We are still here together in the same place we've always been. He rose slowly to his feet, still facing me. Now come and eat or we'll both be late. I forced myself to stand up, keeping my eyes on the floor. That wasn't the password, but at least fake Alex wasn't evil. I could live with that. I had to anyway. Story 8. I wasn't always scared of the dark. One of the biggest traditions I can recall from my childhood was my family's annual camping trip to Yosemite. It was never just my parents and I, but rather the entire extended side of my dad's family, ranging from 20 to 25 depending on the number of people available that year. We'd start coordinating campsites, arrival times, and who was bringing what months in advance. In the days leading up to our departure, the group chat my aunt had insisted on creating for the family would run my phone's notifications ragged, though I was never one to silence it. In fact, the incessant chatter only served to heighten my excitement. Ever since I can remember, I've always loved the great outdoors. As a child, I would frequently set up a tent in the backyard. I'd often lose myself in fantasy, imagining I was off on some rugged adventure deep in the untamed woodlands of ages long past. As soon as I was able, I signed up for my local scouting troop, making it all the way to first-class rank before schoolwork forced me to quit. In a perfect world, I would have stuck with it, but sometimes life has other plans. At least that's the mantra my mother instilled in me. Nevertheless, my love of the adventure offered by the wilderness never waned. I knew that each year I'd find myself packed into my family's car, rumbling down the dirt roads that led to the heart of Yosemite National Forest. The smell of roasting marshmallows, the chill of the river, the fragrance of sugar pines, and the vastness of the twinkling night sky, unrestricted by the light pollution. For all intents and purposes, Yosemite was heaven on earth to me. At least, that's how I'd like to remember it. Now, as an adult, I've come to prefer the constant illumination provided by Los Angeles. I no longer feel a sense of wonder when I gaze upon the mountains and hills lining the horizon. Instead, I feel trapped. I feel watched. I sleep with my bathroom light on, and I keep military-grade flashlights stashed in my nightstand and car. The sunset used to paint a beautiful mosaic of colors across the sky, but now it feels more like a warning. Like I'm watching a timer slowly tick down to zero. In 2016, my family arrived in Yosemite for that year's trip. I was around 17 at this point and now fell into the category of older cousin. This meant I was now expected to be somewhat in charge of responsible for the younger family members, or at the very least set a good example. I wasn't a huge fan of kids, a trait which hasn't drastically changed over time, but I was willing to make sure my hyperactive little cousins stayed safe. I didn't want to see them hurt by tripping over a root or slipping off a rock at the river. I don't hate kids, I just don't really find it easy to relate or engage with them. That doesn't mean I'm apathetic towards them. I feel like most decent people would at least feel a twinge of sadness if they saw a missing child poster or received an Amber Alert warning of an abduction. It seems like human nature to me, that pack mentality that nests in the back of our lizard brain, compelling us to protect our young and those we hold dear. It's just in our nature as humans. Another thing that has cemented itself in humanity's collective consciousness is an instinctual fear of the dark, or if you want to go deeper, a fear of what could be in the dark. Humans are arguably at the top of the food chain because, for the most part, we have developed ways to banish this fear. From huddling around the warmth of the fire to the neon illumination of city skylines, we've come a long way. We've done a lot to push the darkness back. The only locations left where one can experience the ancient dark of our past are places like Yosemite. You never realize just how dark the night is until you find yourself isolated from the light of urbanization. I have very vivid memories of shutting my flashlight off, waving my hand in front of my face, and realizing that I am effectively blind, my sense of depth and space swallowed up by the dark. In that moment, I received a brief taste of that deep animalistic terror our ancestors experienced. I was in the void, and I had no way of knowing if I was alone. But of course, all I had to do was flick a switch, and my flashlight quickly dispelled that feeling of dread. Was armed against the darkness, and surely, so long as that remained so, I would be safe. I'd have nothing to fear. I would say I wasn't scared of the dark more than anyone else my age typically would be. Did I love it? No. Of course not, but it never stopped me from enjoying myself during these trips. Matter of fact, one of my favorite games to play with my cousins in Yosemite was flashlight tag. I'm sure I don't need to explain the rules to you. One seeker, several hiders. Everyone gets a flashlight, and if the seeker manages to shine their light on you and call your name, you are found. As I aged, the game lost its appeal, but my younger cousins still loved to play. Now, we weren't stupid. We knew that it was important to stay safe during this game, especially since we were playing in the forest at night, would never wander far from camp, and everyone was given a buddy. These were the rules that I found my mother repeating to myself, my older cousin Sarah, and our younger cousins just before the game begun that year. I was exhausted and felt like doing anything other than playing a game. I felt was a little too childish for my mature 17-year-old self. More than anything, I wanted to sleep. But tradition was tradition, and it wouldn't be a family trip to Yosemite without the ceremonial game. Among the swarm of children was my little cousin Sam. He was about 9 years old at the time, and to say he feared the dark would be a massive understatement. He was a quiet kid, less inclined to the shenanigans and antics of the more hyperactive cousins. They never picked on him though. He was just shy and more comfortable with the comics and action figures he'd bring to Yosemite every year. That night, I could tell he was on edge. His posture told me that he was afraid, and he seemed unable to stop stealing glances at the dark gaps between the trees. When it came time to pair off with our buddies, he instantly assigned himself to me. I'd always indulged him in his interests. We shared a lot in common. He loved to show me the latest characters he'd sketched or talk my ear off about whatever comic series he was currently obsessing over. Though I was never as introverted at his age, I knew what feeling like an outsider was like. I wanted to make sure he always felt welcome and comfortable with himself. I knew that he compared himself to his more extroverted cousins, so I did my best to remind him that the only person he ever needed to be was himself. So for that night, he was my responsibility, and I was more than happy to help him enjoy a game that I'd loved so much as a child. My younger cousins, Daniel and his brother Mike, were selected as the seekers for the first round. With a 20-second head start, Sam, myself, and the rest of the hiders fled into the trees. The game had officially begun. Sam followed close behind me as we ducked and weaved between branches, our flashlights kept dim and low. For a moment, the feeling of excitement and joy I'd experienced during my younger years in Yosemite returned. The chilly air breezing against my face, the scrape of dirt beneath my feet, the taste of s'mores still fresh on my tongue, each sensation was like a portal to the past. I quickly found myself filled with the determination to win, both for my own satisfaction and for what I viewed as the benefit of Sam. If I could help him win the game, and by extension win against his obvious fear of the dark, I knew I'd be playing my part as a model older cousin. More importantly, I wanted him to see that he was stronger than his fears and anxieties. Eventually, we came across a cluster of trees that offered the perfect hiding spot. Switching off our lights and crouching down amongst the twisting trunks and branches, we settled in for the game to begin in earnest. Straining my ears against the soft rustling of pine needles and the distant chatter of other campsites, I listened and watched for the telltale signs of Daniel and Mike. A cry of surprise here, the erratic beam of a flashlight there. It typically wasn't hard as a hider to know when to silently slip away to a better hiding spot. But for a decent amount of time, the twilight blanket that had draped itself over the woods remained undisturbed. As I focused my eyes and ears against the silence and gloom of the forest, I felt Sam gently tug on my jacket sleeve. In a hushed voice barely above a whisper, he asked me how we would know we were the last ones left. I told him that once we heard the seeker shout, "Ollie, Ollie, oxen free," that was when we'd know that only one group of hiders remained. He asked me why that phrase, and I told him I honestly had no idea. I knew it came from somewhere, and I was sure someone had told me the root of it once, but I couldn't remember. Sam seemed to find the phrase funny. Seizing the opportunity, I decided to further lighten his mood by letting him know that Daniel, despite his tough guy persona, was very scared of the dark. Therefore, I liked our odds of winning. This was a complete lie, but I figured it would help ease the anxiety I could sense radiating off Sam as he picked at his hangnails and stared unblinking into the darkness. Did I think we'd win? Maybe. But I knew Daniel and Mike were competitive types who took the duty of hunting down hiders very, very seriously. For several more minutes, the occasional flash of light and shout of surprise cut through the silence. If my count was correct, Sam and I were among the last players left. I thought we could actually win. Even Sam seemed more relaxed, and I could sense a new air of determination about him. I smiled, feeling proud of both myself and of him. I was then yanked back to the present when I heard footsteps off to our right. As best I could tell, it seemed like two pairs of feet, slow and deliberate, like Daniel and Mark were doing their best to stay undetected. I silently motioned for Sam to stay low, stay quiet, keep his flashlight off, and be ready to run. As we hunkered down, I strained my ears, trying to pinpoint how close the brothers were. They hadn't sounded too far off. Not so close that I knew it was game over, but close enough to know that making a break for it would mean just that, game over. So the strategy was simple. Stay as silent and still as possible. Any sounds or lights would have given us away completely. I could feel Sam tensing as he held a death grip on my sleeve, and in the dark he resembled more of a statue than a 9-year-old kid. I knew that his fears had crept back into his head. The footsteps continued to stalk through the trees. It was difficult to tell if they were getting closer or not. The wind continued to flow through the pines, filling the air with soft and rhythmic humming. It was this part of the game that I'd always found the most exhilarating. The build-up before the split-second decision to either stay hidden or sprint away had never not been thrilling, but something was different that time. My excitement was soon replaced with an older feeling, something more primitive. Though small and faint, I felt every muscle in my body tense. Suddenly I felt small, exposed, and watched. My breath became slow and strained. The hairs on the back of my neck stood on end. It occurred to me that the entire time I'd been listening to those footsteps, I had never seen a flashlight search through the trees. Then, without warning, the footsteps rushed us. Sam took off at a dead sprint, partially dragging me along with him. That icy fear was now screaming terror, and my body made the decision to chase after Sam. Faster than I could blink, however, Sam disappeared into the dark. As I ran after him, frantically scanning the trees with my flashlight, I realized I'd completely lost sight of him. Panicking, I stopped and shined my light behind me. Sam had vanished, and I was just about to inform Daniel and Mike that the game was over and they needed to help me find him. But instead of the grinning faces of my two younger cousins, I was instead met with only the trees. There was nobody there. I searched and searched for Daniel and Mike, but no matter how loudly I called or where I shined my light, there was no sign of them. All that surrounded me was the dark of the night and the looming figures of trees. My mind immediately thought of the state that Sam must be in, lost, alone, and scared out of his mind. I needed to find him. I turned back the way I'd been following Sam. Looking down, I was soon able to find his footprints. Now I wasn't anything close to a skilled tracker or hunter, but I figured if I followed their general direction and continued to call out for him, he'd eventually find his way back to me. This was the exact opposite of how I'd wanted this game to go for Sam. Shining my flashlight downward, I slowly began following the path Sam had left. Twisting and turning through the trees, I soon found myself at the edge of a massive clearing. This was where my family and I would go stargazing, or catch glimpses of a small herd of deer. I knew where I was, but I was also painfully aware of how far Sam must run. The light of the campfires were now just small flickers in the distance. My flashlight was the sole source of illumination against the night. Sam's footprints ended just where the clearing met the tree line. He must ran into the meadow, and sure enough, I could see a path of disturbed grass where it had gone barreling forward. At that moment I remember thinking, this is bad. This is really bad. Sam had wandered much farther from the campsite than I, or anyone else, would have been comfortable with. I began panicking. There were bears in the area, and I shuddered to think what would happen if Sam startled one. But before I could finish this train of thought, I noticed something strange. Right as Sam's footprints disappeared into the grass, a second pair of tracks seemed to meet them. I knelt to get a closer look, and my brain did a somersault in my head. Instead of footprints, Sam's tracks were followed by what appeared to be handprints. Fucking handprints. The spacing of the tracks evoked images of a four-legged animal. The whole scene was off-putting. I felt like I was seeing something I shouldn't, like a secret I was never meant to know. It disturbed me. I looked back the way I'd come, the flicker of campfires like distant beacons in the dark. Every fiber of my being wanted to run as fast as I could back towards the safety of the light. Some ancient instinct compelled me towards the fire, towards the warmth, towards the safety. For the first time in a long while, standing there at the sprawling meadow's edge, the darkness of the night produced an icy and all-encompassing dread that seemed to freeze me in place. Suddenly I was at war with my desire to keep Sam safe, and my desire to feel safe myself. I knew that in his eyes I offered a sense of security. My presence had given him the confidence boost needed to face his fear of the dark and step outside his comfort zone. More than that, though, I had been responsible for him. The blame of the whole situation seemed to fall squarely on my shoulders. He'd run off on my watch, and I'd let myself lose sight of him. I needed to bring him back. But I needed help. I didn't want to be alone out there. I felt exposed and vulnerable, chasing Sam through the meadows alone at night, and the presence of those weird handprint tracks compounded my fear. I couldn't bring myself to cross the threshold and follow into the grass. Swallowing the lump in my throat and forcing my legs to move, I decided the best course of action was to return to camp and organize a group to better search. As I followed my own tracks back towards camp, I felt a tickle at the back of my neck, and my heart skipped a beat. I felt eyes on me. Pausing mid-stride, I scanned my surroundings. My flashlight illuminated the trees and bushes as best it could, but not nearly so well as to banish the sensation. The small gaps between the trees seemed like hungering voids, eager to swallow my light and leave me in the pitch blackness of the night. I looked ahead and focused on the glow of the campfires. It wasn't much further. Focusing on the light, I took one steady step after another, trying my best to force the image of those handprints from my mind and ignore the sensation of being watched. I'd probably taken another 10 steps forward when a branch snapped behind me. With a start, I wheeled around, and my flashlight illuminated none other than Sam. I breathed a sigh of relief. He was all right. In the dim light, he seemed a little shaken up and slightly covered in dirt and grass. Perhaps he'd taken a fall in the meadow. Regardless, all I could think was, great. Crisis averted. Returning Sam to camp with only a couple scrapes and bruises was much better than not returning with Sam at all. I gave him a stern lecture about running off like that and how unsafe it'd been to do so. Sure, I knew he'd been scared, and I'd once been his age with my own irrational fears, so I didn't come down on him too hard. I was just happy to see him okay. The entire time I lectured, he kept his eyes downcast, despite my flashlight only partially illuminating him. He seemed rightfully sheepish, but never uttered a word. Not even a simple "I'm sorry." I took a couple steps forward and reassured him that I wasn't mad. He turned away from me, almost like he didn't want to make eye contact. I called for him to follow me back, yet he remained frozen in place, his gaze fixated on the undergrowth. I asked him if he was okay, but still he kept his mouth shut. This was weird. I felt my worry bubbling up again. Had he been more rattled than I'd anticipated after being even just briefly lost in the woods? Maybe I'd be bringing him back with a little more than just a scraped knee and dirty clothes. I doubted he'd play flashlight tag again anytime soon. Resolving to put this disaster of a night behind us, I gently gestured for him to follow me. We could get him all cleaned up and warmed by the fire. I turned and began walking back to camp. The sound of Sam following soon followed, and I felt relieved that this whole mess would soon be over. I'd had enough of this game, and frankly, I wanted nothing more than to get out of the dark woods and be back by the fire. As I continued onward, I heard Sam close behind me. He didn't sound well. It was almost like he had a bad cold and was breathing strained and heavy through his nose. Turning around, I shined my light on him, and instantly he froze, once again turning to look away from me. In the split second before his gaze shifted, my flashlight caught his eyes and the blood in my veins froze. Sam's eyes reflected the light of my flashlight back at me. My family owned a small cat at the time. I'd seen her eyes do the exact same thing when reflecting a light source. Seeing Sam's eyes mimic this effect broke something in my brain. I no longer felt like I was leading Sam back to safety. The campsite was just ahead, and instead I found myself calculating just how fast I could reach the perimeter if I ran. Keeping my light fixed on Sam, I slowly took a step back. Other things soon began to reveal themselves. A long continuous cut ran up the length of both his underarms, starting at his wrists and disappearing beneath his sleeves. Small beads of blood leaked along the edges, almost like thin incisions. His left leg looked crooked, and I could see the dark and wet patches covering his jeans more clearly now. They hadn't been dirt stains. Shaking, I softly called his name. I wish I hadn't gotten a reply. His jaw moved with a sickening crack, but only produced low and raspy moans. Eventually, those choke sounds formed a single, painfully strained word. Sam. My legs gave out as I stumbled backwards. My flashlight slipped from my hands as I collapsed onto the forest floor. As the light left the thing that stood before me, I watched as its gaze shifted forward, its neck cracking with each stuttering movement. With slow lurching steps it advanced. A deep, animal fear had taken over. I couldn't move. With tears in my eyes, I watched as the thing loomed above me, wearing the face of my little cousin like a mask. It leaned in close. I could smell it, thick and heavy. It stank like roadkill left to bake in the sun. The stench was unbearable. I felt bile rise in my throat. Then the light of the fallen flashlight caught my eye. Amidst the terror, I had an idea. Whatever this thing was, it had averted its eyes when I'd faced it with the light. The thing was nearly upon me. It opened its mouth. Row upon row of rotten razor-sharp teeth filled its maw. I had maybe seconds to pull off what I wasn't even sure would work. I reached into my pocket, yanked out my phone, and hit the flashlight button. I could see clearly now the inhumanity of it, those horrible dead eyes, pale and cloudy like spoiled milk. The thing reeled back and screeched like nails on a chalkboard, clawing at its eyes. It drew deep crimson gashes across its face while writhing in pain. In the precious few moments this bought me, I dove for my flashlight. Grasping the cold metal, I turned to see the thing crawling towards me on all fours, the face of Sam now a pulpy mess of torn flesh. I flashed my light directly into its face. Screaming in agony, it threw itself backwards before scampered away on all fours faster than I could blink. Once again, I found myself alone in the woods. A few moments of silence followed. My vision swam. All I could hear was the sound of my own heaving breath. I remained rooted in place as the sounds of shouting voices and heavy footfall approached from behind. I don't remember exactly what was said to me, but several members of my family, accompanied by a couple people from other campsites, soon surrounded and filled my vision. The events that followed were a blur. According to my parents, all anyone could get out of me was a singular tearful word: Sam. I don't remember much. The park ranger's questions, the search party, the dull shriek of sirens. Everything blended into a slurry of sounds and lights. All I could think about were those milky white eyes staring into me, and that terrible way it had uttered Sam's name. I later learned from Sarah that search and rescue officers combed the surrounding woodlands for miles, but they never found anything. Not a single sign of Sam. Several members of my family refused to leave, insisting that they help search for him. Sam's parents, my aunt and uncle, had been nearly inconsolable. It was all anyone could do to keep Sam's dad from madly running off to conduct the search himself. Knowing what I know, I'm glad, for his and his wife's sake, that he didn't. Naturally, no one believed my story once I finally shared it. They chalked it up to trauma. It's beyond me how anyone could believe that. Sure, losing and searching for a family member alone in the woods at night was freaky, no one doubted that. Why anyone would buy that as a valid reason for me to barely utter a word for several days, I'll never understand. Search efforts continued for weeks after my family finally left Yosemite. Sam's parents always held out hope that he'd be found, but it was painful to watch them grow more and more desperate as time dragged on. Both grew cold and distant towards me. Despite the assurance offered by my parents that it wasn't my fault, I knew better than to believe that every family member shared their sentiment. Whether they wanted to admit it or not, it was plain to see that some of them, even to the smallest degree, blamed me for what happened. The search was eventually called off. Not a single trace of Sam had been found. My aunt and uncle refused to hold a funeral for him, despite most of the family accepting the cold reality that Sam was long gone. He wasn't coming back. I'm only glad that they can still picture his face as they remember him. All I can see are those eyes, and how they'd made me feel like prey in the truest sense of the word. Whenever I peer down a dark alleyway or gaze into the shadowy corners of a room, I feel a small sliver of how I felt that night in Yosemite. As a result of what happened, I developed a crippling fear of the dark that persists to this day. As I said before, I can't sleep with all the lights off. I keep high-powered flashlights in both my nightstand and car, and candles are scattered throughout my apartment. When I gaze out my windows at night, I am thankful for the glow of the city. On the distant horizon, however, I can see the silhouette of the mountains cutting into the night sky like teeth, a constant reminder of what lurks out beyond the light's reach. Therapy has helped me cope, but never fully recover, and after the news I just received, I doubt I ever will. Last week my dad called me during work. His voice was tight and his words were curt. Something had been found. According to him, a report had come in from a group of campers. They'd been doing some off-trail hiking when one of them broke off from the group to relieve themselves. Half buried in the dirt near the base of a tree, they'd spotted something that stood out amongst the leaves, dirt, and twigs. DNA testing was conclusive. There could be no denying it. Half hidden, sticking sharply out of the ground, had been what remained of Sam's lower jaw. Story 9. The Silent Ward. I took the night shift because it paid more. That was really all there was to it. I wasn't in it to help people or give back to the community. Bills were piling up. Student loans. Rent. My car's alignment was shot, and I needed a new pair of shoes. So when they offered a few extra dollars an hour to cover nights at the hospital, I didn't even blink. The place was called DF Memorial. It was one of those huge concrete block buildings from the 50s, the kind with green-tinted windows and humming fluorescents that flicker when you walk under them. The newer part of the hospital had touchscreens and those sleek rolling beds with built-in speakers. But the wing I got assigned to, it was older. No touchscreens, no music, just linoleum tile floors with hairline cracks running through them, a bunch of rusty handrails, and the smell of antiseptic that never went away no matter how many times the place got cleaned. The nurse who trained me, Marla, was about 5'2" and never looked me in the eye. She had this wide-eyed way of speaking, like she was always waiting for someone to interrupt her. She handed me a clipboard, and I noticed her hands shook a little. Not a lot, just enough. "You'll be covering Ward C," she said. "It's sealed off from the main floor, but there's a corridor that still connects through the stairwell. Maintenance left the lights on low for safety." "What kind of patients?" I asked. She hesitated. "You'll see." Ward C had been shut down in the early 2000s after some kind of renovation budget got cut. Supposedly it was only used now for overflow, but no one ever said overflow from what. The place hadn't seen paint in 2 decades. The hallway leading to it was lined with storage bins and old wheelchairs with shredded vinyl seats. Someone had draped a plastic tarp over a gurney, and it bulged in the middle like something was still underneath it. I hated how quiet it got back there. The kind of quiet where your ears start ringing just to remind you you're still alive. The door to Ward C was this heavy fire-rated thing with a steel handle and a faded authorized personnel only sticker that had peeled halfway off. The key they gave me stuck a little when I turned it. I had to push with my shoulder to get it open. The lights buzzed when they came on, but they stayed dim, just enough to see a few feet ahead. There were 6 rooms in the ward, 3 on each side, a narrow nurse's station at the end, with a flickering monitor that didn't seem to be connected to anything. And patients, 4 of them. They didn't speak. They didn't move much, either. I checked their names on the chart. Howard M., Edith K., Lyle D., and unidentified male #3. No birth dates listed. No diagnosis. No scheduled medications. Just vitals. Stable. Monitored nightly. The first thing I noticed was that they all stared straight up. Didn't matter if I walked in, coughed, even waved a hand in front of their faces. They just lay in their beds and stared at the ceiling, eyes open, unblinking. I touched Edith's wrist to check her pulse, and she flinched a little but didn't look at me. Then I noticed the walls. In each of the rooms, near the doors, someone had scratched something into the paint, deep enough that you could still see it through 3 layers of whitewash. The same sentence in all 4 rooms. "Close the door before it comes." Not if, not maybe, just before it comes. That first night I thought it was just some kind of leftover psych ward graffiti. I figured maybe they stuck the long-term mental health cases in here and left them to rot. Or maybe one of the nurses got bored and decided to mess with the new hire. I wrote it off, made my rounds, clocked out, drove home in silence. But when I got back the next night, the hallway felt colder, like the air had been pulled tight. I told myself it was just the HVAC being weird in the old part of the building, but something about the place stuck to me. You know when you walk into a room and you just know someone else is there, even if you can see them? That's what it felt like, except it wasn't someone. It was something, and it was waiting. The second night started the same way. Cold air, dead hallway, no sound except my own shoes sticking to the tile. I buzzed in through the stairwell, past the old vending machine with its cracked screen, and opened the door to Ward C. Something felt off right away. I hadn't touched anything the night before, just checked vitals, log time, left. But now the supply cabinet was open. Not all the way, just a crack. Enough for the door to cast a slice of shadow across the floor. I didn't remember leaving it like that. It made me pause. I walked to the first room. Room 1. Howard M. Still lying flat, eyes open, neck craned up like he was tracking something above him. I looked up. Just the ceiling tiles. Fluorescent light flickering behind a frosted plastic cover. Same as last night. But this time, Howard's lips moved. Not much. Just a twitch. Like he was mouthing something. I leaned closer. His eyes didn't shift. His gaze locked on that same stretch of stained ceiling. I was inches from his face, and I could hear it now, the faintest rasp. "Don't open it." I stepped back fast. My heart was already in my throat. I grabbed my clipboard, pretending I hadn't heard him. Marked his vitals. Normal. BP slightly elevated, but nothing extreme. In room 2, Edith K. had her hands folded tight over her chest like she was praying, but her fingers were moving. Small repetitive twitches, as if she was counting silently, or signaling. Room 3 was empty. The bed was stripped and bare, tucked tight. I didn't think much of it until I realized I hadn't noticed an empty room last night. I went to the station, checked the file again. It still said 4 patients. Howard M. Edith K. Lyle D. Unidentified male #3. But only 3 rooms were occupied. Room 4. Lyle D. Same position. Staring at the ceiling. Pupils dilated too wide for the room's light. When I leaned in to check his pulse, he let out this sharp exhale. I jumped. He didn't blink. Just said barely above a whisper, "Don't leave it open." Same words. Different voice. My stomach turned. I went to room 5. That was the one with unidentified male #3. The door was closed. I remembered leaving it that way, but now the handle was ice cold. Not room temp, not slightly cool. I mean cold like something pulled the heat right out of the metal. I pushed it open and felt immediate resistance, like the air itself was thicker inside. The man was lying perfectly still, just like the others, except his eyes weren't on the ceiling. They were wide open and pointed at me. I froze. He blinked once, slow, like he was registering me. Then his head tilted, not fast, not dramatic, just a slow lean, like he was adjusting to hear better. And then he smiled. It wasn't friendly. It wasn't even human. It was the kind of smile you see when someone knows something they shouldn't, when they've been watching too long. I backed out of the room and shut the door behind me. I tried to laugh it off. Thought maybe I was too tired. Maybe I was reading into it too much. But the scratches on the walls didn't help. Because now the message had changed. In room 2, under close the door before it comes, a new line had been scratched in. Thin, fresh. You could still see the white dust where the paint flaked off. It watches when the door stays open. No one else had been in the ward. I was the only nurse assigned there. Security said the cameras had stopped working years ago in that wing. I even asked Marla if she had checked in behind me. She shook her head fast and said, "I never go in there anymore." "Why not?" I asked. She just said, "We aren't supposed to reopen that ward. It was meant to be sealed." That word stuck with me. Sealed. Like something had been trapped there, or kept in. Later that night, the hallway lights blinked out. All of them. Not just a flicker. Full black. I had to use my phone's flashlight to find the panel and reset the switch. When they came back on, room 3, the one that was empty before, had its door wide open. And the bed wasn't empty anymore. I stood outside room 3 for a long time. It had been empty the night before. That was the one thing I was sure of. I remember the way the plastic mattress looked without the sheet, that pale blue texture that always reminded me of swimming pool liners. But now it was made. Tight hospital corners, blanket drawn up to the chest, and someone was in the bed. They weren't asleep. I could see the rise and fall of the blanket with their breath. The door was open, but just barely, the way someone might leave it if they weren't sure they wanted it open in the first place. I hesitated before pushing it. My fingers brushed the edge of the wood. It was damp. Not wet, but soft, like the humidity had soaked into it overnight. Inside, the person in the bed didn't move. Their face was turned to the wall. A curtain had been half drawn across the space, but not enough to hide them. I stepped in slowly, trying not to make a sound. The first thing I noticed was the smell. It wasn't what you expect in a hospital. Not antiseptic, not soap. It was more like soil, damp earth. Basement concrete after a flood. I looked up. The vent above the bed was dripping. Thin trails of water traced down the wall, darkening the paint. The person turned over. She was a woman, probably mid-40s. Dark hair, pale skin. But what froze me was her mouth. It had been sewn shut. Stitches. Real ones. Thick black thread pulled through the lips, looped over and under like a child's first attempt at embroidery. Her eyes were wide. She saw me. Her body trembled like she was trying to speak, trying to scream, but couldn't. I stepped back. My heel caught on the leg of the bed behind me and I stumbled. The curtain rattled on its rod. She jerked toward the sound as if it had triggered something in her. She lifted one hand. Her fingers made a slow, deliberate motion. Not waving, not pointing, writing. She traced letters in the air, over and over. Close. I backed into the hall. The hallway lights flickered again, like they had the night before. This time, the flicker lasted longer. I stood still, afraid to move. When the lights came back up, the door to room 3 was shut again. And the message on the wall in room 2 had changed. The older lines were still there, but underneath them another had appeared. This one was longer, more rushed. The scratches overlapped, letters jagged and uneven, like whoever wrote it couldn't hold still. It heard the door, now it's listening. At that point, I should have called someone, should have gotten on the radio, walked out. I didn't. Instead, I did another round. I started with Howard. His vitals were the same, but now his hands were pressed flat against the mattress. His fingers had dug into the sheets. He wasn't moving, but his knuckles were white. I checked Edith next. She was still in the same position, but her head had turned ever so slightly. Her eyes weren't on the ceiling anymore. They were looking at the vents. I followed her gaze. The same damp stain had formed there too. The water had spread, darkening the ceiling tiles in a wide, uneven bloom. I could hear it now. Not a drip. A hiss. Room 4 was worse. Lyle was sitting up. I found him that way. Not gradually waking, not groggy, just fully upright, legs over the edge of the bed, back rigid, hands in his lap. He was looking right at me when I walked in. He said nothing, but he pointed at the window. The blinds were down. I walked over, unsure what I was supposed to see. I pulled one slat down with my finger. The outside hallway was dark. No, darker than dark. No exit lights, no emergency signs. It looked like the world had stopped on the other side of that glass. But just as I let the slat fall back into place, I caught a flash of movement. Something small, low to the ground, crawling. When I turned back to Lyle, he was lying down again. No memory of sitting, no sign he had ever moved. His hands were back on his chest, folded like before. That was when I heard the door. Not one of the patient doors. The main one, the thick one at the end of the hall, the one we weren't supposed to leave open. It creaked, slowly, painfully, and then it stopped. Just a little open. Not enough to see through, just enough to know it wasn't shut anymore. I walked toward it. My legs felt wrong, numb, almost. The kind of sensation you get right before a fever breaks. As I got closer, I could hear something from the other side. Not movement, not footsteps, breathing. But not normal breathing either. It was slow, deliberate, the kind of sound a person makes when they want to be heard. The vent above me groaned. Something shifted inside it. And then something small landed on my shoulder. It was wet. I reached up and touched it. My fingers came back dark, not red, black, thick. Smelled like rust and rot and something worse. And when I looked down the hallway again, room 3 was open. Story 10. There's something outside of my house. I moved into my house around 4 months ago now. Just me. It's the first place I've ever had to myself. And it's quite pleasant. A 3-bedroom, 2-bathroom house. I've been renting out in the quiet suburbs. The type of neighborhood you'd see a billboard featuring a stock photo of a family with a golden retriever. The kind of place where the mailboxes match, and the people give a smile and wave when they walk by. It's nice, although I do get the occasional dirty look, being a metalhead in my mid-20s. Long hair, painted nails, and shirts with intangible lettering featuring gutted demon corpses doesn't quite go over well with the middle-aged dads taking morning jogs, catching a glance and giving a look that says if I was drinking coffee right now I would spat it out. Can't say I don't enjoy the attention though. After being alone for so long, any acknowledgement of your existence gives a sense of relief, but recently the attention I've been getting has felt hostile. I don't know how to describe exactly what the feeling is, but it's similar to the sinking feeling of being watched. The people I've seen walking past are no different, still smiles, and the occasional gag. But it's the eyes on me that I can't look back on that's truly bothering me. I would jot it down as normal paranoia, except for one factor. The feeling is only there when I'm outside of my house. In my front yard, backyard, driveway, or even if my garage is open, the feeling is there. At first it was nothing to mind. I'd sit on my porch nearly daily, sipping a mixed drink with my dog sitting beside me. The feeling would arise every once in a while, but I'd just shrug it off and give Mosh a scratch on his head. Mosh would occasionally look towards a fence, up at a tree, or even just look directly out into the empty road in front of us and start to growl or bark. But I'd just quickly say, out before he gave the neighbors a reason to complain. That was the first month. After a month, the feeling became closer, more apparent. When I'd leave for work in the morning, I constantly felt as if something was centimeters behind me, tracing my exact movements, so whatever it is could stand as close as possible while avoiding contact. Of course I would snap my head around to find nothing there, but if I focused on the corner of the house for long enough, I could just picture a figure with its shadowy hand grasping ridged brick corner, peeking over just enough for its eyes to show its full eyes, pale white sclera and solid black pupils. I could picture it, see what it might look like, but that was all. It didn't take long before I started sprinting to my Jeep in the morning. It's not like it was any more than 12 feet away from my front door, but it made me feel comfortable. It's not like I had anyone to explain myself to, and I'd much rather run away from nothing than get caught by something, however childish it is. Getting into my car gave me the same feeling as being 5 years old again, flipping a light switch off and running to my brightly lit room. It felt safe. Initially that only ever happened in the morning, but after some weeks it became a constant in my daily life. Not only leaving for work in the dark morning, but returning home in the afternoon, taking the dog out for a walk, grabbing the mail. Once that started happening, it was only a matter of time before I went from doing nothing more than giving a deep sigh before I opened the door to having a foot race with whatever the hell it is down my driveway. Once I reached the sidewalk, though, it would always go away. I started taking medication my 3rd month here. I had gotten a recommendation from a coworker to get meds for anxiety after we were dead at work, and I accidentally told him about my issues. Sometimes my mind just goes on autopilot and decides to let my mouth do whatever it wants. Nevertheless, I took his advice and ended up seeing a doctor and getting a prescription for an antidepressant that also helps with anxiety and paranoia. It helped at first, but not completely. I still felt it, but the meds made it easier to ignore. I could walk calmly. Hell, I could even sit out on my porch again, with no need to run away from its gaze. After a week of simply ignoring it, the feeling went away altogether. The meds had worked, and I had gotten rid of whatever it was that my brain was tricking me into feeling the presence of. I beat it, so I decided to stop taking the meds. They had always made me nauseous, and I hated that. Looking back on it, I never should have stopped, because a few days later I would discover that they would never work again. My bedroom is on an outer wall of my house. A window that gives a view of nothing but a thick thorn bush, likely planted there by an old owner who didn't want any of their kids sneaking out late at night, for if they tried they would end up leaving a blood trail all the way to whatever house party they'd go to. The bush is what gave it away. After the feeling had gone from outside, life was great. I'd wake up energized, an underlying happy feeling to every day, and fiat motivation behind every action I took. That was until one night, sleep just seemed to escape me. It wasn't too bothersome, it was just hot and my AC had been acting up, so I wasn't running it too cold to save my wallet. It had to be around 3 or 4 when I decided to get up for a glass of water, walking through the dark to the kitchen, every action taken producing a noise amplified by the silence of the night. The knock of the plastic cup I grabbed from the cabinet colliding with the metal of the nozzle of the sink. The loud static-like sound of the running water out of the nozzle. There was an almost relaxation to it all. That was until I heard a resonate high-pitched squeak sound from down the hallway, from my room. The unmistakable sound of a skin rubbing against glass. I put my cup down on the counter after downing my water and stared down the hallway. The glow of the light in my room, the only light on in the house, seemed almost threatening to me in that moment. I almost wanted to stay in the confines of the darkness, until I heard Mosh begin to growl. "Mosh," I whispered sternly, sounding as if I was trying not to wake anyone who may be sleeping in the house, although I was alone. "Mosh," I said again, walking slowly towards my room. When I reached my room, I peeked my head in to find Mosh on my bed, having put himself behind my window curtain, standing on his hind legs, still growling silently. "Mosh, dude, what are you doing?" Realizing he must have been growling at some sort of early morning bird had seen out the window, I was relieved of all tension. I walked to the curtain, and I speedily pulled it back so Mosh could see me and alleviate his instinctual anger towards the wildlife, but as soon as I pulled the curtain back, the thorn bush smacked hard against the glass. The impact and the sound made me jump backwards. My tired mind was immediately snapped awake, fear and confusion immediately entering my thoughts, but above all the feeling was back. While my mind spiraled to find an explanation for the sudden noise, I noticed the bush having an obvious indent right next to the window, as if someone pushed themselves between the two and was looking through straight into the curtain. It was then, when I walked briskly through my house, to my bathroom, grabbing my bottle of medication, hands shaking, and fumbling the bottle until I could get it open. After downing 2 pills with no water, I took a deep breath, hoping it'd take the feeling away once again. That was 3 weeks ago. The following week, the feeling persisted. I discovered that moving rooms helped momentarily, almost suppressed the feeling. After a while, though, each room felt just as bad as the last. Now, I've been sleeping in the small bathroom, just a blanket and a pillow, but the feeling can't seem to reach me there. If anyone has any idea what this thing is, or if you're experiencing something similar, please, let me know. I'll post an update if anything changes. I've taken off of work, told them it's for a mental health break. I just can't bring myself to go outside. I don't want to be where its eyes can see me, the eyes belonging to that I've never seen, the eyes I pray never meet my own. Story 11. I woke up in a place where the sun never rises. I woke up, if you can call it that, in Ziri's bunker, lungs burning, throat raw. The air was stale, clinging to my skin like wet cloth. A metallic tang filled my mouth, and the echo of Lily's laughter still rang in my ears, too loud to be memory, too soft to be real. Ziri was already awake, scribbling furiously in her notebook by the dim glow of an oil lamp. "You saw them again, didn't you?" she asked quietly without looking up. I nodded. It felt so real this time, like they were right there, close enough to touch. She closed her notebook with a sigh. It always does, but you have to resist. Every time you give in, they take a little more of you. "How do you know so much about this place?" I finally asked, breaking a silence that had stretched uncomfortably long. She hesitated, eyes narrowing slightly. "Because I've seen others fall into the trap. Watched it happen. I saw them disappear completely, consumed by the ambrosi." She told me more about the creatures. "When we first met, I called them phantoms. She gave them a name, Mobrosi. It's an old word one her grandmother used when warning her about spirits that fed on suffering. They're ancient, almost timeless entities. Jinn demons, spirits, no one label fits. They don't just haunt this twilight world. They are this twilight world." "I come from Benin," she said. "My grandmother was a Vodun priestess. I studied comparative religion at the University of Ibad. This place, it feels like something from those old texts. Stories of the Ifrit, malevolent jinn, smoke-born shadow walkers. They feed on suffering. In some versions, they serve something older, something unnameable." She looked at me, serious. "I think that's what we're dealing with. This isn't random. It's not natural. It's ancient, spiritual, and it's hungry. And you're certain we can fight back?" I asked. Ziri shook her head grimly. "Not physically. Our only defense is willpower. Avoid them, resist their tricks, and above all, keep your emotions in check." Easier said than done. We went out scavenging again today. Supplies run low faster than you'd expect in a world without sun. It feels colder every time we venture out, though Zeri insists the temperature never changes. As we moved through the crumbling town, I felt it again. That sensation of eyes on my back, whispers just out of earshot. The air was heavy, tinged with the faint scent of burnt ozone and rotting leaves, an unnatural bitterness lingering on my tongue. Zeri paused, eyes narrowing. "They're close," she whispered. I looked around frantically, heart pounding. I saw nothing, but the feeling persisted, crawling across my skin like invisible insects. Then I saw it. A shadow detached from the darkness beneath a doorway, tall and possibly thin, floating inches above the ground. Its face was hidden beneath a ragged cloak, but I felt its gaze pierce straight into my soul. Every muscle tightened instinctively, and my breathing grew shallow, quick, like I'd forgotten how to properly inhale. "Marcus," Ziri whispered sharply, "don't let it see your fear." We stood frozen. It watched, head tilted unnaturally. After what felt like forever, it receded, melting into the darkness. The whispers faded slowly, replaced by an oppressive silence. "We have to move. Now," she said, her voice barely audible. We didn't speak again until we were safe behind locked doors. The bunker smelled of mildew and rusted metal, but now it felt comforting, familiar, safe. Inside, silence took on a different quality, a quiet that wrapped around us like a protective cloak, punctuated only by our uneven breathing and the creaking of old wood beneath our feet. Later, she finally spoke. "There's something else, Marcus. Not just the Ambrosi." "What do you mean?" "Something controls them. A force. An entity. I don't know, but it's waking up. The Ambrosi are just its fingers." A chill seeped deep into my bones. Something worse than the Merzi. The thought made my throat tighten painfully, and I struggled to push the fear away. I didn't sleep well that night. Been quiet the last few days. We've settled into a routine. I wouldn't call it normal, but it's something. We've covered every mirror in the bunker. Zari did it first before I woke up. I didn't ask why, until I made the mistake of glancing at the warped metal on the stove, just for a second. I saw Lily there, reaching for me, her hand against the inside of the reflection. I still don't know if I imagined it, but I haven't looked again. Sometimes Ziri says she still hears her mother's voice when she walks past the old mirror we buried under a tarp. The Ambrosi aren't content with shadows anymore. They want memories, faces, longing. Mirrors lie in here, and lies are loud. We take turns scavenging. Oil lamps light our bunker. We siphon water from a hardware store's backroom pipe, boiling it over a rigged stove. Food's mostly beans, expired granola bars, and stale honey buns. Vitamin D pills are like gold here. Without sunlight, our bodies crave what they can't produce. We found 2 half-empty bottles in an abandoned pharmacy, hidden under overturned shelves and scattered papers. We ration them carefully, one every few days, just enough to stave off the bone-deep ache that comes from living in constant twilight. Each pill feels precious, a tiny beacon of normalcy, a reminder of the sun we once took for granted. Entertainment's hard. I found an old deck of cards. We play Go Fish O Where. She hums hymns when she plays. It calms me. Sometimes she reads the Bible. When I asked her about her faith in a place like this, she just said, "Even in the darkest places, the word still echoes." I'm trying to believe that. We mapped what she calls supply veins routes with the least Perosi activity. She's methodical, practical. Her rituals keep her grounded. I envy that. We're building rotating caches, fallback plans. It's been easier with her here. Too easy, maybe. Sometimes I catch myself watching her. Not creepily, I don't think. Just noticing things. Her steadiness. The way candlelight catches her eyes. The shape of her laugh. And I hate myself for it. Julia and Lily, they're out there. Or they were. Some feelings you bury. You suffocate them before they learn to breathe. Each day, my goals shrink down to something small. Something manageable. Find another can of food. Secure the bunker's weak spots. Take another vitamin D pill without obsessing about how few remain. Keep my thoughts from wandering back to Julia and Lily, from torturing myself with what-ifs. But my biggest goal, one I keep private, even from Zeri, is to remember. Not just to survive, but to hold tight to who I was, who I still want to be. I cling desperately to the memory of my daughter's laugh, my wife's eyes. Those fragments anchor me, reminders that survival isn't just about breathing, it's about preserving the pieces of me that matter most. The bunker smells of mildew and rusted metal, but it feels comforting now, familiar. The air outside always carries a strange scent, like burnt ozone mixed with damp earth, something unnatural and bitter that sticks in your throat. The faint hum of silence weighs heavily on us, punctuated only by our uneven breathing and the creak of old wood beneath our feet. But I had to write it down, just once. Then I can shut the door again. It's time I wrote everything out. A full recounting. Maybe it'll help me remember who I am. It started with a weekend trip to a cabin. Julia picked the place. Lily had her backpack. I made my usual weather joke. Sunny skies, 72 degrees. Then the sun disappeared. 1 second, gold-lit road. The next, twilight. No warning. The car stalled. Lights died, plunging us into a silence, so absolute it pressed against my ears. I turned around. Julia and Lily were gone. Just gone. I searched, screamed until my throat burned raw, ran until my lungs felt torn and empty. But there was no wind, no birds, no life, just the faint bitter scent of something burning at the edges of reality. Eventually I found Ziri, or she found me. I'd seen shapes before, phantoms. I called them. She called them Ambrosi, spirits that feed on despair. They don't attack. They wait, stare. echo your grief back at you until you forget who you are. They almost got me once. I saw Julia and Lily in the fog, heard their laughter echoing faintly, just beyond reach. I ran, but they weren't real, just shadows in their shape. Ziri pulled me back. Since then, we've built something resembling survival. Mapped routes, built caches, fortified the bunker, but somewhere along the way, I stopped thinking about escape and started thinking about endurance. That realization terrifies me, because surviving means adapting. Adapting means accepting, and I don't want to accept this. Still, Zeri steadies me. Her presence grounds me. Sometimes I lean too close, but I remember Julia, Lily. Were they taken here too, or were they spared? I don't ask the question out loud. That's how the Minbrosi slip in. So I write. This place has rules. Don't speak when it's too quiet. Don't hope too hard. Hope is a scream. But writing is a whisper. And sometimes a whisper is the only sound that keeps the dark from noticing you. My name is Marcus. I was a father, a husband, a weatherman. Now, I'm something in between. I don't know what comes next, but I'll keep writing until I find out. The bunker had never felt this silent. Even the usual creaks and groans of settling metal seemed to hold their breath. I lay awake, eyes fixed on the ceiling, counting the seconds between each drip from the leaky pipe. Siri's steady breathing was the only indication that I wasn't alone. Then it came. A soft, deliberate knock at the bunker door. 3 taps. A pause. 2 more. I sat up, heart pounding. I glanced at Zeri, who was already awake, her eyes wide in the dim light. "Did you hear that?" I whispered. She nodded slowly, reaching for the knife under her pillow. The knocks repeated louder this time, then a voice. "Daddy?" My blood ran cold. It was Lily's voice, unmistakable and clear. I stumbled to my feet, moving toward the door. "Marcus, stop," Zeri hissed, grabbing my arm. "It's her," I said, voice trembling. "She's out there." Zeri shook her head. "No, it's not. They're using her voice." I pulled away, hand reaching for the door's latch. But before I could touch it, Zeri stepped in front of me, holding up a shard of mirror wrapped in cloth. "Look," she said, unwrapping the glass. In the reflection, the door stood closed, untouched, but behind me, a shadow loomed, tall and featureless. I spun around. Nothing there. I stared at the mirror again. The shadow moved closer. "They're inside," I whispered. Zeri rewrapped the mirror and shoved it into her pocket. "We need to reinforce the door now." We crouched down and I did everything I could to ignore its calls, and eventually it seemed to stop. Zeri lifted up the mirror and the shadow seemed to be gone. We spent the rest of the night barricading the entrance, piling furniture and supplies against it. The knocking ceased, but the silence that followed was even more oppressive. As dawn, or what passed for it, approached, I sat with my back against the wall, clutching my journal. I wrote, "They know her name. They know mine. They're not just shadows anymore, they're learning." Story 12. My daughter has been standing in the hallway every night. I think something is wearing her. I'm not quite sure where I should be posting this. I've tried to contact the authorities, and they laughed it off as me being overly stressed. One officer actually handed me a card for a trauma therapist. No one seems to believe me. Not my sister, not Emily's school counselor, not even my ex. I don't know where else to turn, so I'm posting it here. Hopefully somebody understands, or at least knows something, and can give me advice before it gets worse. It started subtly. Emily, 10 years old, braces, freckles, an obsession with frogs and ancient myths, used to be a restless sleeper, shed toss, mumble unintelligible things, sometimes whispering about the Black Kingdom under the roots, or the lady in the wall. I caught her once murmuring a name in her sleep, Argantis. I thought maybe she was inventing stories. But 3 weeks ago she stopped wandering and started watching. I first noticed her standing in the hallway around 2:14 a.m., not moving, not making a sound. Her face was obscured by shadows, but her jaw hung slack like no muscles were attached, then snapped shut abruptly, like she was chewing something dry. I wrote it off as stress. But then it happened again the next night, and the night after that. Concerned, I installed a baby monitor in her room. For a while it was quiet, but at exactly 2:12 a.m., she'd sit up slowly and stare directly at the vent above her bed. Not move, not blink, just stare. I called in an HVAC tech. Mike, good guy, came out the same day. After 30 minutes, he came down from the attic shaking his head. System spotless. Looks and smells clean as a whistle, he said, wiping his hands on his overalls. But the vent over her bed, you might want to take a look yourself. Just weird. So I did. I unscrewed the vent cover and stuck my phone flashlight in. About 2 feet in, something had carved symbols into the metal. Not just symbols. Tally marks. Dozens of them. Deep grooves scratched in 3s, 4s, sometimes 5s, always clustered close, like someone or something was keeping count. Later that night, I heard Emily whispering. When I asked her who she was talking to, she looked up at me, her voice too calm. "You interrupted," she said. He was almost done. I asked who he was. She smiled, not the way a child smiles. It was wrong, rehearsed, borrowed. "He lives in the quiet," she said, and then went back to bed as if nothing happened. That night I dreamt of our living room, but something was wrong. The walls were sweating, and every photo frame was filled with static. In the center stood a figure, long-limbed, slack, stooped, wrapped in something that looked like skin but shimmered like oil. Its face was a void, not a hole, just a space, where a head should be. It moved like it remembered being human, but had forgotten how to mimic us properly. It stepped forward, slow and lurching, and when it spoke, its voice was a sick blend of tones: child, old man, woman, mechanical glitch. Visni im redire. I don't speak Latin, but I looked it up. Do you want her back? I woke gasping, and Emily was sitting up again, mouth slightly open, whispering a single word over and over. Dissectio. Dissectio. I found the word in a medical dictionary. Latin. It means dissection, or anatomical separation. I think that's what it wants to do. I think that's what it's been doing. And now, it's not even hiding. Update, 4:09 a.m. She's sitting in the hallway now. Not standing, sitting. Knees drawn up to her chest. Rocking. Just slightly. Her mouth is moving, but I can't hear anything. There's something behind her. Not touching her, but it's around her. A shadow stretching from the ceiling down across the wall like a curtain pulled halfway back. It isn't shaped right. Too tall, too thin, and it bends where things shouldn't bend. I tried to look away, to go back into my room, but I couldn't move. My legs wouldn't respond. Then Emily turned her head. Not all the way, just enough to see me from the corner of her eye. She hasn't blinked. Not once. Not since this started. And I just realized something else. She's still whispering that word. Only now it's not her voice anymore. Story 13. My last shift before disinsection. I never thought a hospital could be frightening until it became empty. It happened a few years ago, right before New Year's. I was on duty in a department that was about to be closed for a 2-week disinsection. No new patients. The serious cases were transferred to other hospitals, the mild ones discharged home. It seemed like it would be the calmest shift of my life. I even felt relieved. No rush with heart attacks. No drunken knife wounds. I was left completely alone in the department. Even the nurse had asked to go home. There was no one to bandage. No prescriptions to write. The paperwork was finished. I could sit in the break room, watch YouTube, sip tea, and at first, that's exactly how it was. But toward the evening, something changed. Something crept into the room through the open door. It was silence. I didn't notice it at once. It became tangible when darkness fell. Not just the usual hospital night silence. Something else. An absence of sounds I had long accepted as background. Footsteps in the corridor, the creak of a mattress, a phone conversation at the reception desk, the snoring of patients. I was used to it. All those evenings someone walked, smoked, laughed. I walked up to the window. The yard outside was empty, an eerily unfamiliar sight. No wounded soldiers laughing while leaning on the railing with cigarettes. No patients talking to family. No ambulances. No stretchers rolling by. Not even the usual line at the pharmacy kiosk. All of it gone. There was only nothing. I stepped out into the corridor. It was empty. The fluorescent light seemed brighter and colder than usual. I kept turning on lights along the way, almost automatically, but it didn't help. The buzzing of the lights echoed the buzzing in my head. I couldn't tell which one was louder, and in that hum, I suddenly caught a rhythm, a steady thump-thump, almost like a heartbeat. I tried to convince myself it was just the old wiring, just the tubes flickering. But I couldn't shake the feeling that somewhere deeper beyond the end of the dark corridor, there was someone else. I slowly walked through the hallway, switching on lights section by section. The silence didn't fade. It felt like it was following me. Light should have brought calm. Instead, each overhead lamp that blinked on only highlighted the emptiness around me. I could hear the light switches clicking. My footsteps echoed dully off the walls. I passed an empty room, beds made up neatly, like for the dead. The floor was shining, sterile, furniture frozen in place. Even the blinds didn't move. It didn't look abandoned. It looked frozen. At the turn in the corridor, I stopped, as if something told me to. Just a feeling. I glanced out the window. It faced another building, directly across. And there on the third floor stood a silhouette. A dark figure, perfectly still, just standing in the light, a long coat, arms at the sides. No movement, but I knew immediately he was looking at me. I couldn't see a face, couldn't tell the gender, but something in the posture was wrong. Too straight, too motionless, like a figure from an old photograph, or a body on the coroner's table. I took a step back, blinked. When I looked again, the window was empty, but the light in that window was still on. I entered the treatment room and disassembled an old metal IV stand. The bottom part was heavy enough and fit comfortably in my hand. I wouldn't say I was scared, but someone really could have slipped into the hospital unnoticed. I stepped out of the department. The floor had several elevators. The lift operator who sometimes helped us chase out vagrants wasn't there. Where the hell did he go? I thought. Probably holed up in his little room in the basement. I decided to take the stairs. Somehow it felt safer. The classroom I'd seen from the window was in another building, the old training wing. The doors were shut. I was about to knock, though I had no idea for whom. And then there was a thud behind the door. I froze, listened, nothing. Then again. A dull, heavy knock, as if something scraped against the floor or hit a wall. Where the hell is security? I gripped the metal pole from the IV stand tighter. With my other hand, I grabbed the door handle. I swung the door open, and I saw it. In the middle of the classroom stood an anatomical skeleton, a familiar plastic figure on a metal stand with wheels. And it was moving, slowly rolling from one side of the room to the other. A draft. Apparently someone had forgotten to close the gate after airing out the room. Maybe the cleaning lady. The wind drifted freely between the buildings, pushing the skeleton gently, soundless at first, until it bumped softly into the furniture. That's what I saw in the window. That's what had been looking at me. I walked over and closed the gate, left the skeleton where it was, then scanned the classroom once more, just to make sure there was nothing else. I left the building and entered the lobby on the first floor, spacious, cold, tiled in gray ceramic. The heavy wooden doors looked monumental and motionless. Some of the ceiling lights flickered, not all at once, but one at a time, unnaturally. One blinked like it couldn't decide whether to light up or go dark. Another stayed on but buzzed faintly. The hum of the lamps echoed in my skull. I couldn't tell which hum came first. I walked past an old health information board. The flyers were yellowed. A few had fallen off. One vaccination poster had only a corner left. The rest had been neatly torn away. Next to it, a large mirror with a crack. I saw myself reflected, but not quite right, warped, or was it just the light? The hallway stretched on, like chewing gum in a dream. The walls were clean, sterile, too sterile. No coats on the hooks, no trash, not even dust. Empty, no one. No doctors, no patients, no security, not even the woman at the front desk, the one who always sat with a thermos and a little cross on her neck. Her chair was empty. And yet, the thermos was there. The cup beside it, empty, like Shed just stepped away, just now. I started to feel uneasy. Where did everyone go? I kept walking. The tile floor echoed under each step. Sometimes it sounded like the echo doubled back, or wasn't quite in sync. One step, two shadows. One sound, three echoes. I glanced at the ER doors. Behind the frosted glass, darkness. But I had the distinct sense someone had just walked out. The air still held a presence. Cold, still, too still. I touched the handle. It was warm. I climbed the stairs back to my department. The moment I opened the door, I was hit by a stench. It hadn't been there when I left, but now it was. Heavy, sharp, rotting, like something had been soaking in the dark for too long. I passed the break room, heading deeper into the department. Step by step, the smell grew stronger. It trailed along the hallway like a stain. I reached the last room, stopped, felt my heart pick up its pace. The lights were off, curtain drawn, absolute silence. I reached for the switch. The light snapped on, and I saw him. A homeless man sitting on the bed, worn coat, bare feet, filthy, sitting quietly, staring straight at me. I froze. For several seconds, we just stared at each other. "What are you doing here?" I finally asked. He said nothing. "There's no intake tonight. The department is closed. We're being fumigated." Still nothing. No movement. I leaned the metal pole against the wall, took a pair of rubber gloves out of my pocket, pulled them on, slowly walked over, took him by the collar of his coat. He didn't resist. Not at first. Only when I led him toward the exit did he start yelling, cursing, struggling, but it was too late. We made it through the hallway, down the stairs. In the lobby, I was met by the receptionist and the guard. Both stared at us in disbelief. "Where the hell were you?" I asked. "You're supposed to be watching the entrance." "I was in the bathroom," the woman said. "And she nodded at the guard. "I was smoking," he mumbled. "Call the police," I said. "This man broke into my department. Let them take him. He could have been hiding there all day." They took him away. It seemed like everything was over. But when I came back into the silence, into the cold, back into the department without him, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. It was just an ordinary night, an ordinary incident. And still, while I was walking those empty hospital corridors, it felt like I was no longer fully here, like someone had been watching me from the outside, and I had been left behind, inside a space that no longer belonged to me. It felt like someone had been watching me from the outside, and I'd been left somewhere inside a space that no longer belonged to me. Story 14. My New Year's resolution nearly killed me. This happened about 4 months ago. I'm a plus-sized woman in my 30s. I would say that my weight is genetic. Everyone in my family is bigger, and I haven't been under 200 pounds since middle school. I'm well past the age that all of my friends got married and settled, but dating has been difficult for me, so I decided it was time to be proactive and lose the weight. It all started with an office New Year's party. My boss decided that instead of having a bar, we'd do some festive activities. One of them was to write down our New Year's resolution to be burned in the bonfire she was going to have her husband build out back. Something about the ash releasing into the air and carrying our manifestation into the universe. She's different. But what else can you expect from someone throwing a parking lot bonfire? The party was dying down by the time they lit the bonfire, but I didn't have anything else going on for the night, so I decided to stay a little while longer. My boss passed out post-it notes and pencils. When I was ready to leave, I scribbled down my resolution, tossed it into the fire, and started off to my car. My coworker Karen stopped me just before I opened my door to chat. She asked me if I was ready to be back in the office from our holiday break, if I had a good Christmas, and other things like that. We chatted about 10 minutes before she asked me what my New Year's resolution was. I told her I hoped to lose some weight, and she gave me the number of her personal trainer. For a couple of weeks I debated the idea of using a personal trainer. It would be pricey, but I knew I needed someone to hold me accountable. I decided to shoot the guy a text and see if he had any sessions available before or after I would need to be at work. He texted me back before I could even put my phone down. I just assumed that he had been on his phone when I sent the message, but knowing what I know now, it feels like more than a coincidence. He told me that he would be able to meet with me that same day at 5 o'clock, so after work I went back to my apartment to change and met him at the gym he worked in. My first impression was that he was a very nice guy, and as much as I hate to admit it now, he was incredibly attractive. Obviously toned on the taller side, dressed in expensive brand clothing, and well-groomed. He made me feel confident that I was going to be able to lose the weight and didn't make me feel bad about my size. He even commented about what areas he thought I should focus on so I didn't completely lose my sexy curves. Definitely inappropriate, but as good looking as he was, it made me blush a bit. He made a few other comments throughout the session, but nothing that made me feel truly uncomfortable. The next day at work, when I asked Karen about it, she said he hadn't ever made comments like that to her, but that she was old enough to be his grandmother, so it didn't surprise her. I had done about 12 sessions with him, and felt comfortable with him. He called me one afternoon a couple of hours before our session to tell me the gym was closed for equipment maintenance. I told him I understood, and to enjoy his day off. but he invited me to his place to work out in his home gym free of charge for the inconvenience. Between the trust I had established with him and the flirty comments he made, I was actually excited to go to his place. I even thought that maybe he was interested in me. I ran home to change and met him at his place just a few minutes before our 5 o'clock session. I knocked on the door and waited just a little bit too long before he opened the door. His usually combed hair was ruffled and he was already sweating, but I didn't think much of it. His house was average sized and nothing fancy on the outside. I can't say I was surprised he was. As far as I knew, single and living alone. I didn't expect much yard decor or any flowers. On the inside, his house was incredibly nice. It was clean and most of the furniture he had was genuine leather. I could tell it was at least 2 stories, but there was a closed door in an odd spot of the house. Not like this area was built on after the house had been standing for a while. Door, but this has to lead to a basement or closet type of door. It wouldn't have made sense to be another room. We made a little bit of small talk, and my suspicion was confirmed. He told me his home gym was in his basement. As soon as he told me we would be going into his basement, his demeanor changed, but I don't know how to explain it. He was acting the same way as always. He didn't say anything that threw me off, but for some reason, something about him just seemed threatening all of the sudden. Maybe it was his smile. It looked different, wider. His eyebrows were sitting differently than usual. I guess the best word to describe him would be rigid. Something inside of me told me I didn't need to go into that basement. I thank God to this day that I listened to my gut instinct, even though it hit me out of nowhere. I asked him if I could use his bathroom and told him I would meet him downstairs after. He pointed out his bathroom and told me it wouldn't be a problem. I went inside, locked the door, and waited to hear him start going towards the basement. The walls were thin, so it wasn't hard to hear what was going on. He opened the basement door and I heard an echoed scream. It sounded like someone yelling for help, but they couldn't get all of it out. Then there was a thud. My heart dropped. I heard him shut the basement door quickly and run towards the front door. There was silence for a minute, and then I heard it. The deadbolt. He locked the door. Full panic set in at that point. He was mumbling something to himself, but I couldn't make it out. He was pacing back and forth for a while, and then he finally called out to me. "Cassandra." It was a question at first, then it wasn't. "Cassandra, I know you heard that. It was just the neighbor kids playing. Come on out when you're ready." "Okay." Bullshit. That came from downstairs. But what do you say at that point? I thought on it. Be out in just a second. My heart was racing. I could hear him walking towards the bathroom door, but it was clear he was trying to tiptoe. I knew I had to look for something to protect myself. A razor, scissors, even cologne I could use as mace. There was nothing. What felt like hours passed by. I hadn't heard any more movement, so I knew he was still by the door. Then my phone rang. The buzzing startled me so bad I thought I was going to pass out, but I knew it was my only hope, so I scrambled to answer. It was Karen. She sounded cheerful, but I could also hear confusion in her voice. "Hey, honey." She paused. "I'm at cardio center. I thought I'd run into you and Jason. Don't you have sessions on Tuesdays?" This nightmare was only growing more terrifying. Jason. My trainer's name is Mikhail. I was frozen and Karen noticed because she asked if I was okay. "Karen, did you say Jason?" My voice was shaky and I could barely whisper no matter how hard I tried. That's when he started banging on the door. He spoke through laughter. "Your friend's gonna hear you die." I hadn't told Mikhail that I got his number from Karen. Apparently I hadn't told Karen that Mikhail was my trainer's name. I assumed she would know. "Yeah, Jason. Jason Richards. Are you playing some kind of trick?" She giggled at herself. Mikhail had walked away from the bathroom door. I could hear him pacing again. Somehow his distance was scarier. If he went much further, I wouldn't be able to hear him anymore. "Karen, I'm with Mikhail Sanchez." My voice broke. I was about to cry. "From Fitness World, the gym's closed today. I'm at his house." I could hear her soft gasp. "What's your location?" 223 Walnut Avenue. I was speaking so quiet I wasn't even sure she could hear me anymore. The banging on the door started again. This time it was harder. He was trying to break down the door. He laughed again. It was such a human sound, but it was laced with an indescribable evil. "Don't bother with that doll. You'll be dead long before anyone else gets here." I dropped my phone and rushed to push my body against the door. He pounded harder and harder. The wood was starting to splinter. He was still taunting me. I started to accept I was going to die. I wish I could tell you that I heard sirens in the distance. that I opened the door and faced Monsieur, that I managed to escape him. I can't. I don't remember how I got out of the bathroom. I don't remember the ride to the police station. I don't even remember giving a statement. It turns out that Karen had 2 numbers for trainers in her phone. She had pre-gamed the office party and given me the number for Mikhail in her tipsy state. She hadn't trained with him in months. He had been fired from cardio center for inappropriate conduct with clients. When the police came to my rescue, they searched Mikhail's basement. They found a college girl who hadn't been reported missing yet in his basement. He was charged with 1 count of first-degree kidnapping and 1 count of attempted kidnapping. He had a few more charges from what he did to the college girl he kidnapped, but they weren't made public. I don't see how what he did to me was an attempt. If Karen hadn't called me, who knows how long I would have been in that basement, or if I would have even made it out alive. Either way, he was sentenced to 50 years without the possibility of parole. I'll never have to see him again, and he'll never have the chance to take advantage of any other women. Story 15. Every morning I wake up with dirt in my mouth. Every night I dream of rotten worms. Every morning I wake with dirt in my mouth. My nails blackened at the edges. I have to carefully rinse my eyes until my vision is no longer blurred, and even so, sometimes an infection manages to take hold. I didn't do anything in particular to deserve this, I'd say, except maybe dig where I shouldn't have. So I ask you to listen carefully. Where did you go today? What did you do? From the moment you woke up until now, what horrid ground did you step on? It's spreading fast now. At the start it was a few localized incidents in the western part of the continent, and some further up north in Canada. We didn't know what to make of it at first, and orders to investigate didn't come until later. For a couple of months it was water cooler gossip and hushed whispers in the cantina. A missing farmer turning up. Changed. Rumors of mass suicides in the Appalachia. Sightings of something. Every witness off-grid interviewed, spoken riddles and fevered poetry. The fog of war was thick, so much so that it was decided we no longer had the option of resolving the situation from our office. The official mandate was titled Proactive Response to the Mole Conundrum. A tad on the nose perhaps, but that's what humans do. We find patterns. We knew very little about it all, but what we did know was that there was some connection to the ground, and what animal do we most often associate with that? There's a kind of fear that comes not from what you see, but from what hides between the pieces. When truth arrives in fragments, glimpses, murmurs, signs without meaning, it leaves the rest to the imagination. And that is where the real horror takes root. The mind stitches shadows into shapes, gives weight to the silence, turns the unknown into something vast and breathing. By the time we were deployed, that uncertainty had already wormed its way into me. I think the others felt it too, even if none of us said it out loud. So we arrived on site just as the morning sun peeked over the pine. On our way to town, we saw scattered rusted trucks in the fields. The general store was boarded up, covered in graffiti, and seemed to have been abandoned long ago. Some people roamed the streets, but wore no joy on their faces. They stared straight through anything that might have been in front of them. But the thing that stood out was how disheveled they looked. Dirt-caked skin, torn clothes, and vacant eyes. This particular town was a hotbed. In many cases, a town suffered maybe 1 or 2 incidents a month. Those were much easier to remedy. Here, we couldn't use our normal strategies. Everyone seemed to have been taken. Imagine the headlines. Mass murder in Rust Belt town. No, here we had to improvise. We did our rounds, speaking to anyone still capable of forming a sentence. Most responses were incoherent. Groans, muttering. The occasional mention of worms. No one remembered where they'd been taken, until we struck gold. As my team of 4 stood on the porch of the David residence, waiting for someone to open the door, I had a weird feeling gently pass through me. It wasn't an emotional feeling, if that makes sense. It was more of a physical one. Something was placed on top of my head, something that had weight to it. It felt as if it pushed me downwards, through the planks and into the dirt, trying to plant me in the mulch of an orchard that wasn't meant for me. It was brief, but I managed to snap out of it only when Mr. David finally opened the door. "Hey boys," he said, and motioned for us to come in. It was obvious he'd been crying. I wondered if he was whole or if he too had been taken. But for a man in his situation, crying seems like the natural response. I'm just surprised he still held it together, even though he was tearing at the seams. Before we even entered his living room, I could hear the dampened sobs of a woman somewhere in the house. The carpet bore dried mud and faint footprints. His wife, he explained. Some time ago, she had been unlucky. Mr. and Mrs. David had been out on a walk. They reached a clearing and started setting up a small picnic blanket. Mr. David was busy uncapping jars of mayonnaise and mustard, while his wife was a few steps away, listening for birds and taking in the greenery. After a while, he noticed how she hadn't spoken a word since they arrived and turned towards her. She stood completely still, not responding to him when he called out to her. Before he could react, she walked towards a patch of wet mud and disappeared, swallowed by the earth. However, he couldn't tell us if he was more horrified by that sight, or when she later that night knocked on the door of their house and called his name in a raspy voice. Now, he explained, she is absent by day and gone by night. Gone? I asked. See, he paused. I've had trouble sleeping since then. Dreams or nightmares. I wake up in the middle of the night sometimes, he said, averting his gaze towards the fireplace, where a small flame burned. A picture frame rested on top, turned towards the wall. I couldn't tell if he was looking at that, or the shotgun that hung above. All I know, she is never in bed when I do. He pointed at the window. One night I heard noises coming from our backyard. I went down to see what was going on, and she was out there eating the dirt. She pleaded with me. It tastes sweet, dear, but I was disgusted. He glanced towards the fireplace again. Sorry, she was eating it? One of my colleagues asked. Same thing other folk in town do, I suppose, he said. Explains the filth, doesn't it? We'd seen this very thing before, in other towns and other states. All the people who'd been taken, without fail, would be covered in dirt and bruises. My personal guess was that something provoked them to return to where it happened, burrowing again, tasting the dirt that poisoned them. Maybe something called to them, but new information came all the time. This was odd, novel, and the situation had slowly escalated to unseen territory. This case made me uneasy in ways I had never experienced before, and I suspect the higher brass felt the same based on leaked emails I got my hands on later. Mr. David was tired, weary. We decided he had experienced enough excitement for one day and thanked him for his time, but not before asking him to point us in the direction of where it happened. He asked for one of our maps, pulled a pencil from his back pocket and drew a circle in red ink around a small area in the woods south of town. As we walked out, the sobs of the woman had penetrated my ears. I felt bad for her as much as you could without ever meeting her. Mr. David looked resigned as he closed the door. We didn't even get to the end of the block before we heard a muffled gunshot reverberate through the streets. As we made our way into the woods, that feeling came again. This time it started at my feet. I was being pulled down by the unseen. I hunched over and vomited. You okay? 3? I never bothered to learn their names, asked. I opened my field kit, scrambled for a rag, and wiped the corners of my mouth. I don't know. We didn't talk much on our hike. It was not that we didn't want to. I noticed many things. Small, perfectly round sinkholes, moss growing in weird shapes and on strange places, a fungus I didn't recognize. But there was this tension in the air, as if we spoke about the phenomena we observed. It would notice us. What that was, exactly, I didn't know. The silence was broken by 2. I don't like this. Nothing makes sense. With every new piece, the puzzle becomes larger or it morphs. You've all read the first reports, right? That man was sick, she said. Yeah, kept going on and on about the same things. Friend of the worms, it's telling me how to go home. I'm looking for my other name. Fucking insane. 3 responded. Exactly, he was sick, and I don't get it. He couldn't give the Bureau one single actionable bit of information, yet he knew that something in him had changed. He longed to go back, but he knew it would do him no good. It is a disease, 4 said. A disease? I've done a lot of shit for this agency, like you, killed and maimed things, captured all kinds of creatures. I could touch them, poke them, I could push my knife into some kind of flesh, or through scales, and I knew they'd die. In that way, I created my own safety. 2 didn't follow, and nobody has seen what causes all this. Why do you think that is? 4 asked, but got no response. Because it doesn't exist. It isn't a virus, or a fungus, or a disease in the biological sense. It is a correction. Quiet fell upon us. I wanted them to stop talking. I wanted to forget everything I knew, go home, quit, and then put my savings into a ticket to Paris. I wanted to get as far away as possible from the place we were moving towards. But every time I thought about pulling rank and aborting the mission, that feeling welled up again. So instead I offered my perspective. I think, I said, the Earth is angry. We walked another 20 minutes, and with every step we took, the bird song we could hear so clearly before faded more and more. 2 and 3 stopped by a tree, covered by a particularly interesting pattern of fungus, to grab some samples. Again, I thought about turning back, but deep down I knew that there was only one way forward. I gestured towards 4, and on we went. I found myself obsessing over the red circle on the map. It was childlike in its shaky shape, but drawn with intent I had never seen before. Thinking back, Mr. David had closed his full fist around the crayon he used, or was it a pencil, and struggled mightily to finish the directions. In hindsight, it almost felt like a sacrifice of some sort. I continued mulling over this as we journeyed deeper into the forest. The shrubbery became thicker. The trees grew closer, and the little light from the afternoon sun barely pierced the canopy anymore. "Here we are," 4 said. I confirmed what he suspected by matching the elevation I could see with that on the map, but truth be told, I wouldn't have needed to. The energy of that place was humming. I convinced myself I could hear speech echoing between the birch, but if so, it was in no tongue I knew. I couldn't muse on that long before we heard something rustling in the distance. "Get down," I whispered. We dropped. We huddled close. Somehow it felt nice to be in obvious danger for once. This whole trip had been nothing but tension and shadows. The pot had been simmering. Now it was starting to boil. A man entered our view. He was naked, but I recognized him from town earlier. He scanned the area relentlessly, but thankfully he didn't spot us. Don't know what would have happened if he did. Every time he looked towards us, I felt towers on my back. Heavy, ancient structures weighing me down. I felt my pulse slow down, and I felt pieces of gravel in my veins. I could almost taste what so many had talked about. I was close to understanding how sweet the dirt was. Down on the ground, I sensed the vibrations of millions of earthworms underneath, moving towards me, waiting to squirm into my every orifice, and then drag me down, bury me, taking me home, my true home. Then the man looked away, and I was left horrified by my own thoughts. There was an immediate danger present, even if I couldn't see the full picture. It was clawing at my mind, and I could barely resist its pull anymore. When the man was content by his reconnaissance, he lay on his back, spreading his limbs like he was making a snow angel. Then the laughing started. Short bursts of maniacal, harrowing sounds that blurred the line between human and animal. He rolled around in the mud, flailing like a fish out of water. Each time he faced the ground, I could see him aggressively biting the dirt. Whenever he ate, he sounded more like a rabid dog than a pharmacist, teacher, or whatever he had been in his previous life. 4 flinched, covered his ears, and looked away, but I couldn't do the same. The ritual continued for an uncomfortable amount of time, until he finally stopped rolling on his back. Silence fell on the forest, only broken up by the loud panting of the man. Then we heard a soft crack, and another. His limbs started bending in odd ways. They turned so that his shoulders pointed downwards. He was still on his back when he lifted himself up. He crawled around on all 4s, but his torso still pointed towards the sky, a monstrous abomination. A human, imitating the most horrid of spiders, so far from God's grace that it made me, a non-believer, shudder. To fulfill the transformation, his neck snapped, rotating his face towards the ground. When he had moved around, it was with inhuman speed and vigor. As if the ground itself had waited for this, it opened up. A small sinkhole appeared, at first no wider than a log of firewood, but it grew, and it grew. There was no rumbling, no ear-shattering cracks. There were no sounds one would expect from the planet opening its wide gape, just the wet slurps and squelching of mud sliding downwards. The man, or whatever it now was, cheered. He crawled to the edge of the hole and stopped. Its head turned towards me and I froze. I had always thought the old adage of one's life flashing before their eyes was made up, an old wives' tale. I thought it was meant to relieve dying men of their worries, and give them hope that they could experience love and warmth one last time. But then and there I witnessed every choice I had ever made in my life. Everything that had led up to this. Then it just dove in, and the feeling was back. I cannot explain the rationale behind what I did next. I do not think I will ever comprehend the forces that acted upon me. I sensed the thing behind the thing. I peeked through the curtains of reality, and something met my gaze. It reached out and placed an appendage or a tendril on my head. I ran towards the hole as fast as I could, and managed to catch a glimpse of the creature. I saw its body twist and break, mud entering its mouth, and just before the hole closed, it shot me a wide, awful grin. And that was it. They wouldn't listen to me on the way back. 2 cried the entire trek. 4 had checked out. I tried to get them to understand what I had seen. I tried to make them understand what I had learned. I wanted to show them, take them with me. For the first time, I felt love for them. I wanted to bring them home. That was one part of me, the one that was taken. It surfaces every once and again, but more often lately. I can still make my own choices most of the time, but that too is slipping. When I sleep, I suspect the other me comes out fully. I dream of old rotten worms, and when I wake up, I'm a feet underground, mouth filled with dirt. Those times I have to claw myself up to the surface. Internal memo, eyes only. From Op-Grid Command. To Field Unit 7B, Appalachian Sector. Subject: Containment Update. Incident Akenta E3L. Date: Redacted. Field conditions have deteriorated beyond projected thresholds. All remaining operations in Zones 3 through 7 are to cease immediately. Local populations are considered non-recoverable. Evacuation is no longer viable. Effective immediately, Protocol Blackout is in effect. Personnel are instructed to destroy all physical records and sever communications with civilian authorities. Await extraction or final directives. If extraction is not received by Redacted, initiate fail-safe procedures. Go spend time with your loved ones. This is a full pullout. We are no longer in control. Commander E. Mallory, High Command. Fubar, they're pulling out. If there is one thing I can do before I return home, it is to warn you. I hope you heed my word. I have woken with worms in my throat. I know what comes next. And now so do you. The dirt will come for you. Story 16. Do you think I'm real? I used to love lazy Saturdays. The kind where the weather's nice. The coffee's still warm in your hand, and you've got nowhere important to be. That was the plan when my wife Lauren suggested we take our son Noah to that thrift shop out on Ashwood Lane. He's 4, and he's got that bouncy energy where everything is either magical or boring in 10 seconds flat. The place had this musty old people smell vibe, with aisles cluttered by half-forgotten junk and cracked toys. Lauren went off hunting for some vintage Pyrex bowls. Noah took off toward a bin of plushes like it was treasure. That's when he found it, or maybe it found him. A cardboard box, unmarked except for a faded red, Sega scrawled across the front in permanent marker. Inside, under some balled-up newspaper, was a large Sonic the Hedgehog plush, easily 3 feet tall. The moment I saw it, something felt off. Its proportions were wrong. The head was too big, the arms too long, the legs too stubby. The fur was a washed-out, almost grayish blue, like it had been left in the sun too long. Its plastic eyes were oversized and glossy, and when I leaned down, it felt like they shifted, not in movement, but in focus, like it was looking at me, not past me. Noah grabbed it before I could say anything, held it tight, face buried in its weirdly lumpy stomach. "He's soft," he said, but I saw the way he glanced up at me next, quick, cautious, like he expected me to take it away. Underneath the plush was a slim white envelope. Inside was an old CDR and one of those clear plastic clamshells. In marker, it said Sonic Super Learning, Prototype Build Do Not Distribute. I turned it over in my hand, curious. It looked like a bootleg from the late 90s or early 2000s, something unofficial, but clearly made by someone familiar with the brand. The woman at the counter sold us the box for $5. Some guy dropped off a whole bunch of old game stuff, she said, shrugging. That one gave me the creeps. I should have listened. Noah wouldn't let go of the plush. He clutched it through dinner, tucked it into bed beside him, whispered to it when he thought we weren't listening. Lauren just smiled, thought it was cute. "He's got a new friend," she said. The first night I waited until everyone was asleep, popped the disc into my laptop. It booted immediately. No install screen, no loading bar, just a black background. And then Sonic rendered in stiff early 3D, popped up in front of a cartoon classroom with mismatched colors and oddly floating geometry. "Hi, friend." The voice was chipper, too chipper, robotic, but not synthetic, like a real person doing a fake happy voice, too loud and a little too fast. It played like a weird off-brand Sonic Schoolhouse. There were basic math questions, shape puzzles, spelling exercises, but something felt off about the pacing. After each correct answer, Sonic would just stare, not for long, but a beat too long, as if he were thinking. I played for about 30 minutes, then closed it. Noah was standing in the hallway when I turned around. He didn't say anything, just looking at me, eyes wide. By the end of the week, the house felt wrong. Noah had started doing things he never used to, staring at walls, sitting quietly for long stretches, clutching Pal Sonic like it was an anchor. And when I asked him to do something, pick up his toys, eat his food, he wouldn't scream or throw a tantrum. He'd just go quiet, like I was a stranger, like he couldn't hear me at all. And always, that plush sat with him, its plastic eyes catching the light in weird ways. Sometimes I'd swear it looked cleaner than it had the day before, like the fabric was smoothing out, the stains fading. I kept playing the game. I don't know why. Curiosity, maybe, or some low hum in my brain pushing me toward it. Each session, the classroom got darker, the colors more washed out, the shadows deeper in the corners. Sonic's model degraded too, joints stiff, eyes slightly out of sync, and he started asking things. Are you paying attention? Would you leave your family to learn forever? Do you think I'm real? I thought it was broken. I wasn't really feeling like giving a shit at the time, until the day after that last question, when Sonic stared silently, mouth twitching upward into a smile that didn't stop growing. Then came, do you think I can ruin your life? And then louder, distorted, because I'm very real, and I can ruin your life. The screen flickered, his face melted, like the textures were peeling off, revealing something underneath. The jaw opened wider than the model should allowed. Then the screen went black. I slammed the laptop shut. The next morning, I crashed my car. Black ice, they said. I don't remember seeing any. I remember glancing in the rear-view mirror and seeing something blue in the back seat, something that shouldn't have been there. I was late to work. My manager gave me a warning. The next day, I was late again, fired on the spot. No second chances. Lauren tried to comfort me, but her words felt thin, like she wasn't really in the room with me anymore. That night, when I got up to get a glass of water, I saw her standing in Noah's doorway, just staring in at him. Pal Sonic sat upright in the bed, arms spread wide, as if hugging no one. She didn't hear me walk up. I asked her what she was doing. She blinked, turned to me and said, I forgot. I started seeing him in reflections. Not Sonic. Something taller, skinnier, blue fur but darker, almost black under the lights. The face was stretched, the mouth open in a wide gaping grin that showed no teeth, just endless pink void. It would appear in mirrors, windows, the dark of the microwave screen when I walked past. Always in the corner, always watching. I stopped sleeping, and then my parents died. House fire. They said it was electrical. The wiring was old, but something didn't add up. The fire report mentioned burn patterns that didn't make sense, like the ignition point wasn't the wiring, but the ceiling itself. I didn't go to the funeral. Lauren didn't ask why. Noah stopped speaking to me entirely. One morning, I woke up to silence. Too quiet. I got up, called Lauren's name. No response. Noah's room was empty. Their clothes were still in the closet, phones on the counter, front door locked. No signs of a struggle, just absence. Pal Sonic was gone too. I tore the house apart. Nothing. No note. No goodbye. No signs of life. That night I opened my laptop again. I had to know. Had to see. It didn't power on. But the screen did flicker once. Just once. And for a moment I swear I saw that long, lanky version of Sonic standing in the black, head tilted. Arms dangling. Mouth stretched open in that impossibly wide smile. It's been a week. I don't go outside anymore. I don't answer calls. I don't know who I'd even tell. The police think they ran off. Maybe they did, but I know the truth. Every night, I see that thing, in the shadows, in the corners of the room, watching. And when I close my eyes, I still hear that voice, crisp, clear, smiling. Still think I'm not real. Story 17. My imaginary friend is getting more violent. Now he wants my permission to do things. It was already dark outside. For 2 hours the only sound was the relentless ticking of the big clock on the wall. They trapped me again. Honestly, it almost felt like my own fault. Same trick as always. Wait until I went to the bathroom, toss my stuff into an empty classroom after our last period, and lock the door as soon as I stepped in to grab it. It was the perfect way to farm laughs, and Seth and his friends were good at it. The whole class walked by laughing as loud as they could. Usually a teacher would notice pretty fast and come let me out, giving the kids a mild scolding. This time no one came, so I waited, tried shouting for someone, gave up and sat there trying not to cry. I didn't want to give them that satisfaction. Crouched in the corner, I kept wondering when the night janitor would finally spot me. That's when I saw it, a shape moving in the dark low to the ground beneath the chairs. At first it was just a blur, then it grew clearer. Long limbs and thin frame, blue skin and huge black eyes. I didn't panic or flinch, because I knew that silhouette. "Terry?" I asked. He walked funny, like he always did, like his knees were put together wrong. Wobbly, tilted, arms swinging a bit too far like he was trying to act human but couldn't quite pull it off. He crouched beside me, watching me the same way he did when I was 8 and scraped my leg on the pavement. Back then, Mom called him my imaginary friend. "He's just in your head," she'd say, smiling like it was sweet. But she never looked too closely at the drawings I made of him. He wasn't really a friend. And to me though, he always felt real. He even cast a shadow. Terry leaned in, his mouth just inches from my ear. Then in a low, raspy voice, broken by erratic laughter, he whispered, "Let me kill them." Good thing Miss Mayworth hadn't left the school yet. She passed by and unlocked the door a few minutes later, and got really angry when she saw me sitting there alone in the dark. She asked me who did it, but I didn't give her any names, just looked down and followed her out in silence. I walked back to my house, hoping no one would see me, but of course they were there. Seth and his pack, waiting near my street like wolves that couldn't let the kill go. Soon as they saw me, they lost it, bursting out laughing, stumbling over each other like it was the funniest thing they'd ever seen. "Jesus, look at his face," one of them shouted. "I bet he cried so much." I didn't say a word, just kept walking past them and into my house. Mom was too lost in whatever pill she was on to notice me, so I went straight to bed. But it took me a while to fall asleep. I kept thinking about Terry's face, his words. The next morning, I tried to keep my distance from Seth and the others, skipped lunch altogether. Instead, I found a quiet spot out in the gardens at school, under one of the big trees, and started reading. I didn't think anyone would bother me, but then I saw Miss Mayworth. She walked straight over holding an apple. "You shouldn't skip meals," she said, crouching a little so we were eye level. I just nodded, took the apple, and mumbled a quiet thanks. "You okay?" she asked. "I'm fine," I lied. She kept at it, gently trying to get me to talk about what happened, but I didn't. Then she glanced at the book on my lap, The Flowers of Evil by Baudelaire. "Pretty advanced for your age," she said. I looked away. I like poetry, I admitted, almost embarrassed to say it out loud. With a smile, she told, "Same here. See you in class," and headed off toward the school. Not long after, I heard Terry's voice coming out of the branches above me. I looked up, and there he was, arms looped over like a monkey, his long blue fingers gripping the wood. He was laughing, loud, erratic. Then the whisper came back, now sharper, over and over. "Let me kill them. Let me kill them. Let me kill them." It crawled under my skin, made my hand shake. I couldn't take it, so I got up and left. As I walked off, I heard him shout behind me, his voice almost desperate. "You have to let me kill them." It was late afternoon, last period. Miss Mayworth's English class. I asked to go to the bathroom. She nodded, barely looking up from the book she was lecturing us from. But when I got back, everything felt off. The class was still going. She was reading aloud, but there were muffled laughs across the room, smiles being bitten down and heads turning slightly toward me, then away. I stopped near the door for a second before walking quietly back to my seat. Something felt wrong, so I checked my desk, then my backpack. That's when I noticed my notebook was gone, the one I kept very well hidden. My hand started shaking as I rifled through every pocket, every book, but it was gone. Then a kid next to me leaned in with a smirk and slid a paper toward my hand. I looked down. It was one of my poems, ripped straight from my notebook. I looked around. Slowly, horribly, I saw more. Plenty of pages passed around like trading cards. Some read them aloud in hushed, mocking voices, while Miss Mayworth called for attention, trying to understand what was going on. A few tried to stifle laughter, and some didn't even try. I looked across the room and saw him. Seth. He was sitting there like a king, holding my notebook, now half empty, like it was a trophy, looking right at me with that smug, dead-eyed smile. Something broke in me at that moment, and I stood up so fast I knocked my chair over. Miss Mayworth paused her reading. I didn't even hear what I shouted, because my vision blurred red. My throat was raw. It felt like something else had taken control of my mouth, something deeper than rage. The class burst into more laughter, not at the poems anymore, at me. Seth leaned back in his chair, relaxed, enjoying the sight of my tears. Miss Mayworth quickly walked over, placing a hand on my shoulder. "Outside," she said, gently but firmly. "Let's go." And I followed, eyes down, face burning. She closed the door behind us. We stood in the hallway as I kept staring at the floor, ashamed. "Are you okay?" she asked. I didn't respond, and we kept silent for a few seconds. Then I heard it, Terry's voice. "Can I kill them now?" His voice was right there, facing me. I looked up and froze. Miss Mayworth stood there, but her eyes became huge, black, endless. Her fingers had stretched, long and blue, and she smiled like Terry. She asked me again, softly, "Can I?" My throat tightened. I wanted to say no, I knew it wasn't right. I knew they didn't deserve it. But all I did was nod a shy yes. Her smile widened. Without saying a word, she turned around, opened the door, walked calmly back into the classroom, and shut the door again. I heard a lock. I stayed in the hall. Seconds later, I heard the gasps. Then screams, desks, scraping, chaos. A splash of red painted the tiny window in the door. The crying was so loud I can still hear it now, almost as loud as Terry's laugh. And I didn't move an inch. I just stood there, numb. Story 18. Our campground had a silly park ranger mascot. I'm convinced he's now real, and following me. I started as a seasonal ranger at Black Hollow in late spring when the air still held a chill and the trees hadn't fully leafed out. The park was typical: wide trails, lakefronts, the occasional drunk camper. Not glamorous, but I enjoy the outdoors, and there's not much paperwork. Funnily enough, the only thing that really stood out to me in that first week was the old signage. Nearly all of it featured the same character: Wally the Forest Ranger. Big cartoon glasses, green uniform, huge shoes, and a cheesy smile. He had slogans like, "Take care of the forest, and it will take care of you. Stay on the trail, it never fails. Leave nothing but footprints, take nothing but memories." You know the vibe. Wally's design screamed 1960s. Bright colors, bold outlines, hand-painted lettering. They were charming in that retro way, like gas station mascots from a bygone era. I mean, cute, I guess, but there was something about him that felt off. Maybe it was the eyes. They were drawn wrong, but they didn't quite line up either. Or maybe the smile was just too forced, like he was trying too hard to be liked. As the weeks passed, I started to see Wally everywhere. Old signs located along the trails, cutouts in front of abandoned visitor centers, a giant fiberglass statue in the overgrown campground. I even found an old metal lunchbox in a storage shed. Wally was on it, holding a rake and trash bag. It's frustrating seeing the park run down like this, and it was certainly strange seeing this mascot everywhere. I wasn't the only one who wasn't a fan of Wally. My supervisor, Tanya, told me. Kids hate him. Locals too. So why is he still everywhere? I asked. She shrugged. Budget cuts, man. You'd be amazed what gets left behind. I asked her where he came from. She didn't know. Some old regional campaign, possibly. She always changed the subject. It was odd, but I didn't think much of it. I was just happy to be out in the peace and quiet, but unfortunately for me, my relationship with Wally was only just beginning. It started small. I'd walk the trail near Eagles Ridge and pause at a Wally sign. I knew well, same idiotic smile, same clean up your mess line, but something seemed off. Perhaps the angle had shifted just slightly, or maybe it was that his raised finger, always pointing to the sky, now bent a degree to the left, toward the trees. It was subtle enough that I questioned myself. Memory playing tricks kind of thing. Then another sign up near the old picnic area had both eyes scratched out, like someone had gouged them with a blade. I thought it might have been teenagers, but the only campers in the area that week were a pair of elderly birders from Wisconsin. Still, vandalism happens. I let it go. Same thing with the mural on the side of the tool shed. Wally had always been wearing his vintage uniform, but that morning, I swear, he was wearing the same thing as me. I asked Tanya if someone had repainted it. A practical joke to welcome me to the job. Some lame hazing or something. She gave me a weird look. That mural's been sun-faded since the 80s. Nobody's touched it. I was confused. A little creeped out, but I moved on. Days later, I was picking up old trash from a forgotten trail when I spotted a building I'd never seen on the maps. It was half hidden in brush, roof sagging under decades of snow. Moss blanketed the shingles. The front door had no handle. I pried it open with my multi-tool and stepped inside. It was an old visitor center. Place was filled with park information, taxidermied animals, flyers about summer programs, that sort of thing. In the middle of the room sat an old projector. It was on one of those wheeled carts every high school used to have. In front of it was a fraying screen covered in mildew. I don't know what compelled me to play it. It shouldn't even have worked. But after a loud pop and hum, the film crackled to life. It was grainy with saturated colors. Wally stood next to a Boy Scout. A jingle played. Wally the forest friend says, "Keep the forest clean. Pack your trash, douse your fire, and leave the forest green." Wally's mouth moved a little off sync. The kid was holding a marshmallow stick. It was all very innocent. Retro. Pretty lame, but kinda fun. Like I said, the guy was kitschy as hell. But then the film jumped. 1 second, Wally was talking to the boy. Next second, the screen was static. And then Wally was alone, still smiling, still waving. But the forest behind him had darkened. The colors desaturated. The sky went from baby blue to gray. The boy was gone. Then back. Wally was just staring at him. The boy looked scared. Wally started speaking, but it was hard to make out. And it was a good octave lower than his speaking voice. I leaned closer, trying to hear what he was saying to the boy. Then the cartoon glitched again, and Wally was closer. Looking out. Looking at me. It glitched back, and the happy-go-lucky Wally was teaching a PSA again. I got a weird feeling that didn't go away. When I left the visitor center, something about the air had changed. It wasn't just that the sky was dimming early or the sudden hush in the trees. It was as if I'd stepped over some invisible boundary when I watched that film, and now the forest wasn't interested in letting me go the same way I came. And for the first time in all my days of being out in the woods, I was lost. I moved deeper into the forest. The terrain sloped downward, thick with rotting pine needles and ferns so high they brushed my chest. My boots squelched in soft earth, and even the insects had gone quiet. Every now and then I'd hear a faint snapping sound, like a twig breaking far off, and I'd freeze. But nothing ever followed. Then I saw smoke. It was faint, like the ghost of a campfire long dead. I followed it. After 10 minutes, the trees broke into a clearing. A shallow ring of scorched earth lay at the center, ringed by chunks of broken stone that might have once been benches, or maybe some kind of fire pit circle. The ground was blackened, cracked, ash-flecked. Whatever fire had burned here had done more than roast marshmallows. Sitting just beyond the ring, half collapsed under vines, was a wooden structure, an old scout shelter or amphitheater maybe. The roof had caved in one corner, and graffiti scrawled in charcoal across the front read, "He walks after fire." I stood there for a long time. Then I stepped toward the stone circle. Something crunched underfoot. I looked down. Burnt plastic. Melted, but still recognizable. A pair of shattered eyeglasses. Thick, round lenses. I knelt, stomach flipping. They looked just like Wally's. But the glass was bubbled and warped. The metal blackened and twisted like it had been thrown into a bonfire. I picked them up and turned them over. The arms were gone. Nothing else nearby, just the glasses. But I did see something in the dirt. A footprint. Not a boot. Not a sneaker. Barefoot. Toes warped. Blackened. Burned. Like someone had walked straight through a blaze and left the skin behind. Suddenly I felt like I wasn't alone. I looked around. The empty forest stared back at me. But the feeling still nagged me. Was someone behind me? I grabbed my phone and flipped the camera into selfie mode. As soon as I looked at the screen, my stomach dropped. Behind me, way off in the distance, was a figure. Suspenders. Round glasses. A silhouette, but not quite. The limbs were too long. The head too still. He didn't move. I didn't either. I blinked, and he was gone. I quickly made my way out of there, and by some grace of God found my way to a trail. That night, I thought I heard something crunching in the woods. I stepped out with my flashlight. Just trees. Just wind. The next morning, someone had rearranged the pine cones in front of my hut. They spelled, "Hi." I started finding Wally signs again, but it was different now. New cutouts I swore I hadn't seen before. A sign pinned to the door of the outhouse, showing Wally pointing directly at the viewer, with red ink scribbled under his feet. You forgot something. I removed it, tossed it, but the next day it was back. I told Tanya. She half listened while eating a sandwich. Someone probably squatting out here. Old guy maybe. Creep. Happens more than you'd think. I spent the next day combing the woods near the old cabin. I kept finding more Wally merch stickers stuck to trees, Wally-themed coloring books in perfect condition, Wally's face on paper plates tied to branches with fishing line. None of it made sense. I couldn't shake the feeling. Something about this place didn't sit right. I borrowed Tanya's car and drove an hour to a small-town public library. In the archive room, buried among faded brochures and yellowing newspapers, I found him. Bernard Wally Walcott, 1963, 1972. A friendly-looking man in every photo, round glasses, suspenders, an easy smile. He'd started the Forest Friend Initiative. Wally the cartoon mascot was based on him. Then the article took a turn. In July of 1969, something went wrong. Some suspected bullying. Others blamed the isolation out in the woods. Either way, something broke in Wally. While leading a group of young scouts, he tied them up and set the whole campsite on fire. Maybe they ignored one too many of his safety messages. Only 2 boys made it out. The park never recovered. Visitation plummeted. I was freaked out, but the idea of me actually seeing this guy, his ghost or whatever. Surely the problem was my mental well-being. I told myself it was stress, the mind playing tricks. Occam's razor, anyone? I started doing yoga, breathing exercises, took sleeping aids to get plenty of rest, anything to reduce stress and anxiety. And it worked. I calmed down. I stopped seeing the figure. Weeks later, a group of campers arrived. 4 guys from Chicago doing a reunion trip. Nice enough. They hiked all day, drank all night. I warned them about staying away from any abandoned structures. They didn't listen. Few nights in, they complained the old shower block was cursed. Said they kept hearing noises at night, like metal screeching, doors slamming, kids screaming. One guy said he saw a figure watching them through the steam while he pissed behind the showers. Said it looked like a man, but not really. Said it smelled like wet matches. I didn't tell him what I'd seen or experienced. Instead, I hiked out there myself the next morning to check it out. The shower block was a rotting concrete cube, windowless, half collapsed in places, graffiti caked every surface, all pretty harmless. Ghosts, dicks, pentagrams, you know the deal. But something new had been added recently, a mural painted in a childlike scrawl across one entire wall. It was Wally, but not the cartoon version, not the smiling mascot. This Wally had empty black pits for eyes. His grin split his face like an axe wound. His hat was half burned, melting into his skull. His arm, once used to cheerfully wag a finger, now ended in a charred skeletal stump, as if he'd been reaching for someone in a fire. And beneath him, in the same childish script, he burns what you leave behind. I couldn't downward dog my way out of this one. I was scared. And that night, just past 2 a.m., something screamed from the woods behind my ranger hut. Not human, not animal. The place also smelt like smoke, like wet matches. I looked out my window. Far down the slope, through the trees, a figure stood. Tall, thin, wrong. Wearing the shreds of a ranger uniform, smoke pouring out of its back, head tilted to one side like it didn't know how a neck worked. And even at that distance, I could see 2 glowing blank holes where its cartoon eyes used to be. It pointed a skeletal blistered finger at me. I didn't sleep. I waited. This time I knew it was not stress. I knew it was not loneliness. He was there. It was time for me to get out. At sunrise, I walked around the cabin. No footprints, no marks. But the pine cones were back. This time they spelled out the words "bad boy." I burned them in the fire pit. I messaged Tanya, was leaving. She offered me a ride. We agreed for her to pick me up on the main road a few clicks east. I went on my way down the necessary trail. The wind picked up. It blew in one direction only, toward that creepy fire ring. It hissed as it moved, dry and haze-like, carrying the scent of burning cedar. And then I heard the jingle. Soft, warped. That same clunky old-timey tune from the film reel, only it wasn't coming from a speaker. It was being whistled, off-key, slow. from somewhere among the trees. It took me a second to recognize. It was Wally's theme. I turned around, eyes scanning each shadow. Nothing stirred, but the whistling continued. Closer now. I tripped over a log, and then the whistling stopped. Just silence. Then a child's voice called out. It was all so surreal. I thought I was dreaming, until it returned. Faint, distant, but surely real. "Hello? Hello? Mister?" I looked around. The woods were empty. At least they seemed to be. "Hey, mister, want to make a fire?" Again, the voice was closer. I froze, trying to will myself invisible. Nothing moved. Then came the sound of sticks snapping under someone's foot. "Please, we can show you how. Wally says we're really good at it now." The voice was childlike, but strange. Like an old record someone had played too many times. Worn down, edges warped. I kept scanning the area, trying to locate the source. The trees seemed to be shifting. Or maybe just my brain was. But the next second, I saw it. A fire, burning perfectly in a clearing about 20 yards away, and seated around it, 6 children. All in old-fashioned scout uniforms, their faces blackened, their bodies completely still. And at the center of it all stood Wally, his ranger outfit charred and covered in ash. His flesh looked wrong, like someone had put on a costume made of human skin, but hadn't zipped it up properly, jaw hanging way too open. He was holding a stick with a flaming marshmallow, and he smiled when he saw me. "Don't be shy," he said, voice warped with static. "There is room for one more." I backed away. The children all turned in unison, heads slowly twisting like gears in a clock. Their eyes reflected nothing. "Don't you want to learn?" Wally asked. "Don't you want to do it right?" One of the kids raised their hand. "Show him," she said. And then, like choreographed dance, the 6 children began to mimic building a fire. In eerie harmony, they chanted instructions. "Clear the ground. Stack the kindling. Circle the ring with stones." Their hands moved precisely in a dance they'd done 100 times. "Light it. Feed it. Watch it grow." They smiled. Too wide. "Never forget the water," said one. "We forgot." "I said I was sorry," whispered another. "I said I was sorry," they all shouted together. The fire surged higher. Wally tilted his head, like he was admiring his little campers. Then he looked at me. "You can't leave," he said. "Not until you learn light it, feed it, watch it grow." I turned and ran. Branches whipped at my face. Roots clawed my boots. I didn't care. Behind me the voices kept calling. "Light it, feed it, watch it grow. Light it, feed it." I ran until I couldn't hear them anymore. Until I collapsed, wheezing, heart drumming. I'd made it to the road. The woods were silent again, but the air still smelled like smoke. I never went back. Black Hollow is closed now. Last week a controlled burn swept through the area I'd been in. At least that's what the article said. I wonder if anything survived, if that's the end of it. But I still dream of Wally. And at night, sometimes when I'm just falling asleep, I can still hear it. Light it. Feed it. Watch it grow.